Good evening. I'm going to give the mayor the chair for a moment for a brief
report.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it is with great sadness that I report the death of a great friend of Oak Bay, Bob Carter. Died in the early morning hours of Sunday. The name may not spring to mind, but for those who volunteered, he was a great volunteer. But one of the things he was known for was his kindness, his random acts of kindness. And one of the things he did for our community was to produce this award that I have here. It's a stainless steel that he worked with an artist, Alarian Gallant, who's well known locally. They made this in 2015. He donated 6 of these to Oak Bay, and we've used them to commemorate very special events and also departures. So, for instance, we gave one of these to Lorraine Hilton when she left after many years with us. Joan Halverson after 37, and Lady Carnarvon, who is owns Downton Abbey, although it has a different name. And also we presented one of these to the Songies as well as Bob Carter himself. He turned 90 last month. And as I said, he'd very kind. He had a full and productive life. He started in retail, worked in business in the Toronto area, eventually got into federal and provincial governments, and we will miss him sadly. I got a note from the artist who was with him up until the end, late Saturday night, and where they had a lively conversation. And we shall miss Bob. He was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal Award winner. So, and you may remember him from council. One of the things he did was he did these crossword puzzles, connecting people, connecting things, and he did one which I shared some time ago with council, with all our names intertwined. So, thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Jensen. I'm going to call the meeting to order. As acting mayor, if you're not aware, we have the opportunity for 3 months of the year to chair the meetings of the Committee of the Whole, and we appreciate the opportunity to practice our skills at chairing. I'm going to begin by welcoming everybody in Lekwungen, Oseam Nuchela Cha. And we acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Coast and Strait Salish people. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. Please note that the video recorder is on and that these meetings are streamed live and archived on the municipal website. So we are all visible. Maybe the backs of your heads at the committee table are visible. So we're going to begin tonight's agenda with a presentation from the Municipal Finance Authority of BC, and I'm going to ask our acting Chief Administrative Officer Debbie Carter to introduce our guest. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to introduce Shelley Hahn. Shelley is a senior executive with the Municipal Finance Authority of British Columbia, the MFA. She oversees the short-term debt fund managing the MFA's commercial paper program, short-term loan program, and investment portfolios. She oversees all requests and approvals for financing. Shelley has been on the board of the Government Finance Officers Association of BC since 2005 and is very active in developing educational opportunities for its members. She has won a number of awards. Most recently in 2017, she won the Outstanding Contribution Award for her continued role in promoting financial education. She currently teaches several courses through GFOA BC, including debt financing, and is a frequent guest lecturer at Capilano University's Municipal Finance course. So welcome, Shelley.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present on behalf of the MFA. I just have a short presentation just to deal, most of you are probably familiar with the MFA, but I'm going to touch on a few points regarding that. And also we'll talk about a little bit about borrowing and the borrowing process and how that function all works. Okay, and I guess I can take questions during. Okay, so as you feel. Remote control. Okay. So most of you probably are familiar with the MFA, but I just wanted to give you a little overview of our governance model because it is quite something, and also our credit strengths. And those of you that are investors in the market know when you see 3 A's, a triple A, you know that it's a good investment, and we happen to have 3 of those, so we're an excellent investment. And I'm going to touch a little bit on the legislation for borrowing. It's not a free-for-all. There actually is legislative requirements when you go to borrow. And we'll briefly touch on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about borrowing limits, how much municipalities can borrow, why they'd want to, what kind of the limits are on that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a debt policy. So the first thing is we were formed in 1970. We've been around a long time. I've worked for the MFA since 1997, so I've been around a few decades. And I specialize in legislation and the actual borrowing process, so I'm here to help you with that. We're independent from the province, even though they formed us in 1970. And our key thing is to provide low-cost financing for infrastructure. And we do that quite well, and I'm going to talk about how we do that as a cooperative model that we're in. And we also provide investment alternatives and things like that. But we're here to talk about the debt this evening. So our governance, we're represented by the entire province. And so we have 39 board members. They come from the 28 regional districts, and population dictates how many board members you have. In the CRD, based on population, there are 2 members on the board. And Susan Bryce and Dave Howe are the members for the year coming up. And from that board of directors, there's elected 10 trustees that the executive management will work with. So there's 10 of those. And we actually this year reached 12 employees. When I started in 1997, there was 5 of us. But now we're up to 12, which is fantastic. So where do we get the money? So basically what happens is we go out into the international capital markets and we sell bonds. And we sell bonds to investors. Most of the investors are life insurance companies, pension plans, things like that. There are small retail that you can buy bonds as a personal investor as well. And we issue those into the market, and then we turn around and lend the money out to our municipalities. And so we are the lowest cost issuer, so the least expensive interest rate in all of Canada. And so what that means as a cooperative model, as a smaller municipality, Oak Bay, if they were to borrow any money, their interest rate would be a lower interest rate than the city of Toronto, Montreal, the city of Vancouver. You actually pay lower interest. And that's because this is a cooperative model and we all work together. You're not a standalone entity in the borrowing world. We also do short-term loans and things for construction financing. So if you ever find yourself building a larger building or a larger project, you can do construction financing as you go. Okay. So why do we have those AAAs? The reason why we have the AAAs is you have to think from an investor point of view. Whenever you go to borrow money, we actually take 1% from you and put it in well, I call it a big bag of money, but a large envelope of money, so to speak. And that's held for the credit of the bondholders. So if anything was to happen, they know they'd always get paid. And from an investor point of view, that's a pretty powerful statement when we know we have a bag of cash. And so if you weren't to pay your bill, they're always going to get paid. This is one of the reasons why we have the AAA. The other thing, those of you that own homes, you'll see sometimes a small line item, and it might say Municipal Finance Authority, and it might say 10 cents if you have a $500,000 home. And so clearly from that, you know that we don't need the money. It's just there in case anything was to happen and someone couldn't pay their bills. We could tax if we wanted to. We've never have. Don't intend on doing it. And then also that, this is the other part I wanted to explain a little bit about. It's what we call joint liability. So when you go to borrow money as a municipality, you actually have to approach your regional district to borrow the money. We borrow in the cooperative model of 28 regional districts. And so when a municipality within a regional district would like to borrow money, they would approach, so in your case, you would approach the CRD with what you want. They borrow it on your behalf through us. Why we do that, it's called a joint and several model. And it's pretty unique across Canada, but as as an investor, it's another powerful statement. Because what it's saying is that when you go to the regional district, and I have a little map here, when you go to the regional district and borrow money, everyone around the regional district has to agree that when you borrow the money, you're borrowing it through the regional district. And on the slight chance you couldn't pay, someone else will help you pay until such time as you can pay. It's never ever happened, but in theory, it's a really good collective model. So this is what we call joint and several. And so basically what happens is, we loan the money to the regional district, and the regional district relends it to you, and at the same interest rate. There is no markups. There's no markups or anything. It's at the exact same interest rate. And so when the MFA collects, we collect from the regional district, and they need to collect from their member municipalities. But once we've collected, we're satisfied. And now if the regional district can't collect for some strange reason, they might go and say, okay, well, they can't pay today. Can you help out? Because regional districts typically don't have tons of reserves on hand. So that's the mechanism. It's never ever been used, but I'm mentioning it from the point of view is from the cooperative model, and one of the reasons why we have the lowest interest rate in Canada, because as an investor, they know we have a pot of cash, we have taxation authority across all of British Columbia, and we have this joint and several mechanism. So those are three powerful, really powerful things, and like I said, as the cooperative model, it really helps your interest costs. A couple other things, and I'm going to talk more about these debt limits in a minute. Municipalities, they're restricted as to how much they can actually borrow. It's similar to like when you go to get a mortgage. They look at what kind of revenues do you have coming in, your paycheck, those kinds of things, sustainable revenues, not one-time things. And they take a look at what kind of revenues those are. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And as you know, municipalities have to have balanced budgets. It's not like provincial and federal governments who can run deficits. You must balance the books at the end of the year. And if they don't, you must balance it in the following year. And so from an investor point of view, that's pretty good. They know that municipalities have a bit more control. And then there's the whole provincial oversight. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, it's changed like 20 names since I started, so that's what they are now. And they do oversee, and they take a look at municipal finances when you go to actually borrow money. No, please do.
Just actually, Councillor Croft had a question first, and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I understand the process of we are backstopped by the CRD, who is backstopped by the MFA. Who backstops the MFA? Is that the province?
No, the member municipalities. So we are not tied to the province, and the province doesn't have a guarantee on any of our debt in the markets. But from the mechanisms that we have, whether it's the municipality approaching the regional district and getting that backing, to having the debt reserve fund, to having provincial taxation authority. So I guess from an MFA point of view, our backstop is the provincial taxation authority, which is a pretty powerful thing. We don't have to ask the provincial government if we can tax. We can just tax. And so that is our ultimate backstop, although that's the end resort.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you. So it says, from what I understand, you're saying here that the 25% is the MFA's limit. So what are the rules limiting municipal borrowing then? Or are we coming to that? Did I jump ahead? I'm
that's
so
perfect.
sorry.
No, that's awesome timing because I think it's coming. Just hold that thought, and I'm going to go into quite depth. That's one of the slides I want to actually go into quite a bit of depth on it. But one of the things, just so now you know, there's so many players in this. We've got capital markets and regional districts and ministry people and rating agencies. And so I just wanted to go through where, municipalities and regional districts, they put their, Debbie works hard with their LGDE filings that have to be done on May 15th. And when all those things go into the ministry, we actually take all those stats as an aggregate. And we report those when we do a credit rating presentation, for which we have 3 coming up here in the next month. And after we present to the credit rating agencies and they see how conservative BC is with their debt, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, and once we get the credit rating, then the investors will, and these investors don't always just look at credit ratings, they also do their own homework as well. We get lots of calls from investors about, what mills have stopped when the forest fires came, what kind of things are happening with the employment. So they're doing their homework in addition to these ratings that they're actually looking at. And so once we do have the rating, though, and we can go out to the investors and we can actually get the money, then we relend the money to the RD, and the RD relends it to the municipality. So there's so many people in this process, but it's a good process. So I just wanted to show a map of BC, and just to let you know that there's well, I was going to say debt everywhere, but that you can see that there's debt in most parts of the region. We've broken this down into 8. And you can see Metro Vancouver has the most debt, which makes sense because they have the most population. And when you look at North Coast and the Northeast have the least population with the least amount of debt. Obviously the debt is for infrastructure. We don't loan money for operational purposes. We loan money for capital infrastructure. And so, so you can see Vancouver Island. And so over the years, Vancouver Island has started to get a bit more debt, as you see Nanaimo building things, the Capital Regional District building hospitals and so forth. You also see that the Central Interior and the Kelowna area, because that's where the population is going. So these 3 areas is where the population is heading, and that explains why there's a bit more debt going on there. Okay, so I just want to briefly talk about the legislation for borrowing before we start talking about limits and debt policies and so forth. And when you go to the community charter, there's a regulation in there that talks about the borrowing power that we're going to go into a bit of more detail on. So it actually limits the amount of money that you can borrow based on, like I said before, those control sustainable revenues. After you do that, then you need to borrow using a loan authorization bylaw, and that's a procedural document. It takes about 6 months to get one. So you have to, when you start doing these kinds of things, you have to plan when you're going to need the money, right? Because it is a process, and you'll see why the process is so long in a minute. We already talked about the temporary borrowing, and that's where if you needed construction financing, the last thing you want to do is pre-borrow money and pay interest for something that you're not actually using yet. And so that's where the construction financing part comes in. And then obviously when you go to borrow, it's a decision of council together that approaches the regional district. And so that's done by the conducting powers of council. And then the regional district financing. So you have to approach the regional district after you have your meeting saying we'd like to borrow the money. So that's a brief overview. The course that Debbie was referring to is 8 hours long, and we spend 4 hours in this. So there's quite a bit to it, but that'll just give you the overview. So why does it take so long, the 6 months? So you'll see up in the top left, we have the municipal LA bylaw that I talked about. The ministry wants to see it before you go to the public. They want to see what you're doing with the money. And one of the reasons is as a municipality, we're to do what they call traditional things. So sewer, water, roads, rec center. There have been some municipalities that want to borrow for things that aren't really of municipal in nature. And those things never get through the ministry because it's supposed to be conservative and you're supposed to be borrowing for things that are actually municipal in nature. And so that's one of the reasons why the ministry will look. And they'll also take a look at what the effect of a taxpayer would be. If you were to borrow money, how much is it going to affect the taxpayer, and is it doable? Is it sustainable? And so once the ministry's satisfied that those things are good, then you can go out and do the public approval process, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And once the public has approved that you're going to borrow this money, if applicable, and I'm going to get to that in a minute too, then you'll get this certificate. And from that certificate, you can now approach the regional district to borrow, for which they have to also go through a borrowing process, right? And then MFA, the management review, myself and my team will go through any of these borrowings. And then we approach our trustees, that's that board of 10, and we'll run it by them. And then after that, we go to our members meeting, which is this week on Thursday. So there's a lot of people touching this file and checking to make sure. So this is why one of the reasons why at the regional district level, the ministry has looked at it, the public has approved it, or if applicable. There's lots of things that have happened before it gets to the regional district level. So in my 20 years, I've never seen a loan turned down at a regional district level. Okay, so that's why it takes 6 months. Okay, here we go, the limit on the borrowing. So the 25% that I was referring to is actually per municipality. So basically what happens is you're allowed to use certain revenues for the purposes of calculating what your borrowing limit would be. Very similar to, like I said before, if you were going to get a mortgage, they'll ask you, what is your paycheck? And you'll say, I make this much, and my neighbor left me this money, but the neighbor's not going to leave you that money every year. So that's not considered sustainable. It's nice and all, but it's not considered sustainable. And so that doesn't count. And so there's certain revenues that count and certain revenues that don't count. Now remember, you can collect all the revenues you want to collect. This is just for the purposes of calculating how much you're allowed to use for paying of principal and interest, which it means debt servicing. This becomes a little bit more tricky when you're in industrial. So say you've got a mill or something like that, because there actually is they cap what you're allowed to rely on in these smaller towns, so that you don't overextend because you've got one mill. In Oak Bay, you don't have that scenario. There's no the class 4, so you don't have that problem. So your revenues are your revenues. And so some of the revenues that they let you collect are your sales of services, so all your user fees, rec fees, those kind of things, building permit fees, unconditional grants, there are a few left that you get. Casino revenues, not so much here, but in most cities there are casino revenues. Investment income, I know now it's a little low, but you can count that. And your own purpose property tax. So not money you collect on behalf of other organizations like MFA and BC Assessment in school, but your own. And you're allowed to count those certain things, okay? Obviously, if you got a grant, and I know that you've got some recently, and they're conditional on something else, you can't count that as revenue because it's already spoken for, okay? So there's their limit on that, and I think I have an example coming up. So when we talk about that 25%, and I'm going to show you Oak Bay's scenario in a second, but when we talk about that 25% for debt servicing, that's a legislative limit. That doesn't mean that that is the limit. That's the maximum limit. But I don't think I've ever seen a municipality actually go that high. That's a large amount of money, and you're going to see when I flip the slide how large amount of money that is. And so basically it's more of a theoretical calculation, but it doesn't really take into account, you know, changing market conditions and demographics, and maybe you've got more reserves and you need less debt. You know, maybe you are in one of those small resource towns and something might close and the people might move, and so it is a theoretical limit. So when you're looking at actually borrowing, you want to take into account your own municipality's scenarios, what might happen here that would change any of your revenue, what's your growth going to be like over time. Some municipalities grow like the dickens and some don't, right? And so you want to take all those things into account. So here we go. So I took a look at, with Debbie's help, I took a look at the 2016. And why we're talking about 2016 is because 2017 financial statements aren't due to the ministry until May 15th. So we don't have the 2017 data, so we're looking at the 2016. Chances are your revenue hasn't changed dramatically, and so we're good with this. And so for the purposes of the limit, so in this particular circumstance, you might have had more than the $39.4 million. This is just the revenues that were on those categories I had here as defined revenue sources. That's what this is. That's what that 39 is. You might have had more money, but this is only the money we want to talk about. So the legislative limit is if you take 25% of that, it's telling you, the legislative limit, that in annual debt servicing, which is principal and interest, per year, you can spend $9.8 million. That's the theoretical limit. So you do have a small amount of debt now. I think you've got a $4.175 million loan that's coming to its end in 2023 at a really low interest rate of 2.4%. Is coming to its end here at 2023, and you have a few equipment financing loans, and that's what makes up that actual debt servicing. So you have a very, very small amount of debt, very conservative. And so what that's saying is if you're allowed to spend 9.8 and you're only spending 400, you've still got quite a bit of it left, right? So that's good, 9.46 million, but what does it actually mean? How much can you actually borrow? That's what you can pay. So using a 4% interest rate over a 20-year amortization, it works out to be $122 million. So you can see how that's quite a bit of money on your theoretical limit. So that doesn't mean you know, need to borrow $120 million, but that would be the maximum limit that you could borrow at this stage, is that amount of money, because you have very, very low debt, right? So I am going to point out the assent-free. Very few municipalities have this because they're not as conservative as you are. But when the legislation was done in 2004, the community charter came out, there was a provision in there for those municipalities that have very, very low levels of debt. If you have low levels of debt, and so if you took that revenue, the 39 million, so instead of timesing by the 25, which is the maximum, they say if your debt servicing per year is under 5% of that limit, any debt that you incur keeping it under that 5%, I know it sounds complicated, and I'll go through it again, keeping it under that 5% does not require public approval. The key word is does not require may. It doesn't mean you know, that's up to that's a council decision whether you do it or don't do it, but you don't have to do it. And so, and this is because you have low levels of debt, and a lot of debt is expected for infrastructure building. So if you have low levels of debt, right, there is a provision that in your case, what this means is if we take that 39.4 million and times it by the 5%, because we're trying to keep it under the way under the 25, and you're already spending 410,000, you've got 1.5 left. Using that same 4% 20-year, you can borrow $20 million without public approval. Some use it, some don't. Depends what the project is. So there you go. So it's quite a bit of money that has the capacity, and as you know, it has to be sustainable and you have to repay it. So it's just a theoretical number. Okay. So a couple things when you're approaching what you're borrowing. So obviously you need to have a plan. And I know you guys have been working on your infrastructure plan and stuff. So what are you borrowing and why are you doing it now? A lot of times, you know, the number one question we get when interest rates is low is, well, the interest rates are low, we should borrow something. And it's pretty much, you know, were you going to do the project if the interest rates were high or low? That's not the deciding factor on whether a project needs to be done or not. The deciding factor is it necessary? And you're doing it now because, right, it needs an upgrade or whatever. And so, and the other thing too is it has to be in your financial plan. So you have to have thought about it. And Debbie would have to put it into the plan for your approval that this would be coming up. Okay.
Councillor Croft has a question.
I understand the theoretical $20 million borrowing, but what I don't understand is the assent-free portion, 1.5 million. So that would reduce that 20 million by the $500,000 that we basically are already debt servicing. Do I understand that correctly? Sorry.
Yeah, let's go through it again. So under the regulation 174, if you have low levels of debt, you're allowed to incur up to 5% of your sustainable revenue. So 5% of that 39 million. You can use that room without having to ask the public to go and borrow that money. And so if we take the 39 million and we times it by the 5%, and we get that 1.9, but you're already spending 410. So the 1.5 plus the 410 hits you at your 5% of the revenues. And so what it's saying is the difference is the 1.564, right, is what you're allowed to spend annually without asking the public to borrow the money. When I do the translation, it works out to be 20 million. So out of that 122, 20 million can be assent-free and 102 can be through the public.
Okay, thank you, Chair. No, I just the order in which it went, it didn't quite, so the 20 million wasn't below the line, it was above the line, so that's
Okay.
why I was, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. And the other thing, the financial plan. The other thing is interesting, as I've seen over the years, is the philosophy has changed. You know, it used to be there are some municipalities that we won't incur any debt. We're going to save all our money in reserves until we have enough to fund it. That's still, in some cases, some municipalities still do that. On the other side, there's been a move towards perhaps some reserves and spreading a little bit over time, intergenerational equity, so that the people are moving into the municipality are also paying, not just the people that have been here. And then what your risk tolerance is for debt. This has a lot to do with, you know, is your municipality stable enough and your tax revenue stable enough, and you don't have those mills and with fluctuating type revenues. And so these are the things you look at when you start going into debt is, you know, if you consider borrowing, is what would your philosophy be? There's nothing that says you have to 100% finance anything, right? Some smaller municipalities do, way smaller than yourselves, will do that, but they don't have a choice. And then there's, some reserve, some debt, and development is also another thing. Development is really starting to pay for things as well. I don't know your situation here, but that also contributes a lot to not having to do any debt. And then we look at your current debt levels, and yours are minimal.
Councillor Croft, do you have another question?
Yeah, I do, Chair. I've never seen this term intergenerational equity. What is that?
Yeah, so basically it's well, I wouldn't say it's a new term. It's been around a lot. And basically what you've got is, people moving into, I'll just give an example, is people living in a municipality for years, and they're paying their tax, and we're saving up our reserves. And so they're pretty much paying. And then you've got new people coming in, right? Whether they're younger or not is irrelevant, but there's new people coming in. And when they come in, everything's paid for, because the people before just paid for it. And the new people coming in haven't contributed as much, but they're still using it. And you don't know how long they're going to be here. And so and like I said, it's philosophical, but it's that move towards, you have reserves which came from existing people, and spreading it out a little bit over time. Don't get carried away, but spreading it a little over time just to push it out to the next generation, but not totally push it all, if that makes sense. So a little bit about debt management policies, which is a key thing. You've had very, very low levels of debt for years, and the key thing is if you're even remotely thinking about possibly a small amount of debt or whatever, it's good to have a policy in place. I've seen many, many different policies. Some will only borrow money if it's for a certain thing. Some will only borrow money if the increase on taxpayers no more than a certain percentage. Some we won't borrow money if the debt per capita exceeds this. And so there's lots of ways that you can do it, but it is a policy, and it is obviously changed. The key thing is to keep your flexibility. So, I've seen smaller municipalities where they didn't allow themselves that flexibility, and then when it came to borrow money, they couldn't borrow any money because they did it for other purposes instead of thinking about what possibly could happen in the future. And so that's all it is. It's just to keep it on a sustainable path, and to tie it into your asset management plan and your infrastructure replacement going forward. So it's a document that goes together, right? And some of you have been to our website. There's lots of different things on here that help you with borrowing and interest rates. The key things would be looking at our long-term financing rates. A 10-year loan for 2.98. You can think of that as getting a 10-year mortgage for 2.98%, which isn't bad. Interest rates are rising, but they're not going to rise dramatically. Just they've been inching up. So, and you can see all about our credit ratings there. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. All right. Do we have any further questions from the committee? Mayor Jensen?
Just trying to get back at this intergenerational equity thing. So really what you're saying is, if you're going to do a capital project, and you do it all with reserves, that means the existing and residents who'd been there a while paying into the reserves, they're actually paying, and the newcomers are having a free ride.
Not my words, but yes.
But essentially, they're not contributing.
Not
On
contributing
the other
to that.
hand, if you have it all debt, it's the people moving in, or people who are there and moving in will share it for whatever length of time.
And perhaps the reserves could be used for the maintenance part of it.
That's right. So depending on how one views what is fairness between those that have come before and those that will come ahead, then that's a matter of trying to balance the two, the reserve payment and the debt payment, for a project. Because I know, and Ms. Carter was around in the days of the water department, and we did a kind of an amortization when we did a project. So, for instance, I think the dam was amortized over either 50 or 100 years. Do you remember?
Testing my memory.
I think it was over 100 years, because it was felt that it would last 100 years. And so we essentially borrowed all of that, but spread out the payments over that. We amortized it over 100 years to create that debt equity. Is that something that municipality, I know the water department did it, And is that something that you see in municipalities?
No,
And
that's
how
a-
does that work? Maybe you can give us a
That's
little
a very good
example.
question. So according to the community charter, the maximum amortization term that you can use is 30 years. So we don't have any 50 and 100. So if it was to last 50, 30 is your maximum. So we see a lot of smaller towns, obviously, with a smaller, population and not enough to have such. Because as you know, it's like your house mortgage. If you're paying it off quickly, the payments are higher. And if you're paying it off here, the payments are lower, right? And so you see there's a lot of smaller towns moving it out to 30, but that is the maximum. Our average rate, of course, all of our loans is 15 years. That is the average rate of repayment is 15 years. A lot of the larger municipalities pick 15, but you can pick anything up to 30.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Hahn. I appreciate the excellent overview of the MFA, an organization that's always puzzled me. It's just this morass of money that's just out there. I recall a number of years ago, maybe when the Liberals first came to power, they were looking for money, and I recall hearing that the MFA was sold. I don't know. Did I hear that wrong? Like, who owns the MFA?
You do. Well,
I
not
do.
you personally,
Yes.
but all the municipalities in British Columbia. We're a member-owned organization. We're formed by local government to work for. That's why our board is representative of every regional district in British Columbia.
Right.
Is we're actually a member organization,
Right.
and this is why we don't mark up debt. We're not for profit. We return if we make surplus, we return it back
Okay.
to municipalities. So we're owned by municipalities.
Fantastic. Maybe I was thinking of the building that used to be, or I think it still says Municipal Financial Authority on it.
The
down on-
building's sold.
The building sold.
building
Maybe I
is
was thinking of
sold,
sold, and
yeah.
maybe I thought the MFA went with it.
No,
but I guess not.
we just moved uptown.
All right. Oh, great. So that takes care of that question. Another one I have is I've noticed some municipalities have chosen, not necessarily us, but some have chosen to divest themselves of certain classes of investments, such as they don't want to be in oil, or they don't want to be in tobacco, or there's certain things from a philosophical perspective. Those local governments in British Columbia have chosen to divest the money that they're holding in reserve out of those particular classes of investments. Is that something that the MFA helps to sort of facilitate, or how does that work?
Okay, switching hats to investments, no problem. Yes, we have been approached over the last maybe year and a half. There's about 4 municipalities that have approached us. And just for a little background, so you know what we're talking about, is the Municipal Finance Authority, we do investments for local government. And we have 3 pooled investment funds, and they're managed by Phillips, Hager, and North, and they're all what we call fixed income. So there are no equities or derivatives or any swaps or anything funny like that. It's all fixed income, safe and secure. And so in the last year and a half, we've had 4 municipalities approach us saying that they don't want to be invested in oil and gas. And so if you look at our pooled funds, and they are available on the website that I was showing you if you went to the pooled funds, and it'll tell you what we're invested in. And when we say oil and gas, and so we might be invested in some companies like Enbridge with pipelines and so forth. And so a lot of them want us to divest out of oil and gas. So what happens, though, is when you're in a pooled investment fund, and all of us know that this is Canada, and it's very resource-based, and oil and gas is one of the resources, when you start pulling out those types of investments, you now become not as diversified as you used to be. And when you have lower diversification, you have higher risk. So now what you're doing is putting extra risk on the municipal funds, because now they're in not so diversified investments. And so taking it one step further, what we thought we would do, and we've done a survey, and you likely have got that last year, we're looking at not a oil and gas free fund, but an SRI, so socially responsible investing, which is not just oil and gas. It could be child labor. It could be anything like that. And so right now we're looking at doing one of those, but we need a certain amount of money in order to form a fund. And so we need $100 million, and we're at 65. And so you have to have a critical mass in order to go into a fund like that. And so everything going into the fund would then become screened. And so, and now keep in mind, once you have a screen, and of course it's going to cost a little bit more. So the returns won't be high as a different investment, but we're trying to work on a socially responsible investment. And so the other thing too is, when you're a cooperative, like I was saying, in our pooled investments, we have people that live and work in the north, and that is where their municipal revenue comes from, is the oil and gas. So it's really hard for them to divest out of that. And so when you're in a cooperative, there's good and bad. And so that's the one thing, and this is why we're looking at the SRI fund.
Wonderful. If I may, Chair. So another question I've got to ask is, I'm sorry, I couldn't tell on the slides, which ministry is the one that has to chime in?
Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Okay, thank you very much. And final question is, I understand UVic has recently been given an ability to take on debt. Is the MFA working with UVic, or would that be a separate organization?
No, so the MFA is restricted to loaning money with municipalities, regional districts, and regional hospital districts, and 2 organizations in Metro Vancouver that run their utilities, which is a sewer utility and a water utility. And also ECOM and CREST, which we're familiar with here. And those are the only entities that we can actually loan money to. We have been approached in the years to get involved in university financing, but it doesn't fit our model. Our model is that cooperative model, and they don't use the same financial reporting. They don't have anything to do with regional districts. They don't fit into our model. So, but I know that they're working with the ministry, I guess Ministry of Finance, I guess would be it, to do that.
All right, so Councillor Braithwaite, Councillor Croft, and then Councillor Ney.
Thank you. I just wanted to just double check that I heard you right, that all of the long-term borrowing options are based on bonds.
Yes.
Okay. And then the borrowing and lending is based on aggregate fund risk valuation, not specific to any one municipality. It's like a pooled thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so when we do our presentations to rating agencies where we get our credit rating to get the investors to give us the money to loan out, when we're doing that, we don't go and say these are Oak Bay's financial statements. We go, these are our clients, and this is the aggregate financial statement. And this is why you can see when we had all the debt in the Lower Mainland and some not so, but aggregately together we have a very low amount of debt in Canada. And so they're looking at the aggregated risk of the investment.
Okay, Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. It's very interesting. The question I had is that you commented on debt policy. I'm showing my ignorance. Oak Bay doesn't have a debt policy. Is that what you were suggesting? Or
no,
okay.
I'm just saying that it's part of the practice when you're looking at if you have one or up to date one.
Okay.
I don't know that answer.
Maybe Ms. Carter can answer that. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair, Oak Bay does not currently have a debt policy. However, it's certainly on our radar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ney.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. Thank you very much. That's very helpful and very well presented. I really appreciate that. Just 2 questions. On those occasions when you do need to go seek public approval, what does that look like?
Yeah, so, and there's 2 ways they can do that, and Sonia can help me out. So one is a referendum, where it's a referendum, which would be a normal, almost like an election. It's held the very same way with the voting booths and so forth. There's planning that takes to be done that way. And the second way is what we call the alternative approval process, which is, you post some notices, I believe in the newspaper and other places, counter petition, and you give the public the opportunity to come down to the counter here at Oak Bay and say whether they're against it. And if you get a certain percentage, more than 10% of the population have to say they don't want it, and then it can't go through the alternative approval.
Just one other further question, if I may, through you, Chair. On your slide, the loans to client one, where you had the picture of the province and the different regions and the,
Okay.
you got it? Yep, the net debt. So what is the net debt that you're describing here?
Yeah, so the net debt is, and so when we go to do borrowing, we loan you the money. And when you repay us in principal and interest, so because we're getting the funding from a bond, which is a bond holder, when you buy a bond, you typically get your interest paid to you every 6 months. But when you buy the certain kind of bond that we're issuing, which is called a bullet debenture, which means as a bondholder, I'm not expecting my principal back that I loaned you for, say, 10 years. I just want my interest twice a year. And so what happens is at the MFA is we collect the interest semi-annually from you and pass it on to the bondholder. There's no markup or anything. It goes in and out. But when you pay your annual principal payment, the bondholder's not expecting it, and so we will be investing it. And when we invest it, we earn money, and the amount of money that we earn, we actually reduce what we ask you to pay us back. So what that means is when you borrow $1, at the end of the loan, you're not paying us back $1, because we're going to be investing money and helping you towards your repayments. And so with the net debt, we have money building up. And so we have the loan and we have this money that's building up towards repayment. And so it becomes a net debt.
I was just trying to understand the loans to clients dynamic there. So you see that obviously Metro Van is high, and then Vancouver Island is high compared to, I mean, that and the central interior. But what does that mean in relation to other, what is that actually saying when it's
In Vancouver
moderately
Island?
high? Yeah.
Yeah, so what that's saying is that, you know, and especially we have the CRD area, and you'll remember when I said that when we loan money out, we loan money out to municipalities, regional districts, and regional hospital districts. And there's been a lot of hospital building over the last while. It was announced with the Liberal government there, you know, hospitals were popping up all over the province. And two of them, you'll know, are in the north end of the island. And so even though the hospital district and the municipalities don't pay the whole lion's share of the debt, it's typically around 40%. Those were $600 million hospital. So, you know, just things like that will add together. Other than that, you know, you've got small municipalities that don't borrow a lot, but the CRD, we've got some hospitals, you know, they're doing the Summit Care Center here, that will be in there, and so there's a lot of other things other than just municipal debt. Sewage treatment is coming. Right now it's in the construction phase, and they're using what I referred to as temporary borrowing with that construction financing, because they don't quite know yet what they're going to go to long-term debt, and so they're doing the construction financing, waiting for those grants to be coming from the provincial and federal government. And then at the end, they'll be putting some into long-term debt, but actually a small amount. Out of the $765 million project, $60 million will be going to long-term debt, and that's all. They've been requisitioning for quite a few years, and so that has allowed them not to borrow so much money. Okay.
Mayor Jensen, you had a question? Okay.
I did have a question to do with your term, and it kind of ties into what Councillor Croft was asking a little bit. And your phrasing of Oak Bay has minimal debt. Can you tell us what that means in relation to other communities our size?
Yeah, when I refer to minimals means you don't have a lot. You know,
It's a relative term.
It's a relative term. There are some municipalities that have none, right? But you can tell when we talk about that approval-free zone and having the 5% when you don't have to ask the public. It's not actually about asking the public. It's just meaning that you're very conservative and don't have a lot of debt. And there are very few municipalities that have that. Very few. I can count them on my hand. Very few.
So arguably we do. Our policy is not to have debt over the years and be very, very conservative. So thank you.
Yeah, and there are some that don't have any debt.
Yep.
You know, they sell a lot of land, and so they have a lot of money. Yep. You know, it's just circumstances in the area.
Yep. Different circumstances. Thank you. Thanks. That was my.
Great.
Move the seat.
Okay, Kate,
sorry.
Sure. And do we have a seconder? Okay, I just had a couple of comments to make before I call the question. I really appreciate the explanation. It's really good to know, especially given that later on our agenda, as you may be aware, we have an asset management report that we need to, that we're very excited to be moving forward with. So this is really laying the groundwork for what the work we may need to be doing very soon. And planning for. So it's really helpful to have this backgrounder, and I appreciate that Debbie invited you. So I think that's where that came from. Thank you, Ms. Carter. Sorry, I just called you by your first name. We are really casual here in the Committee of the Whole. My question was about the our capacity for borrowing, given that we have a very large sum in our reserves currently. Like, I think that $20 million is a large sum. I might ask your opinion on that, but I as far as comparables to other municipalities, I feel like that's a large amount of money. Am I wrong in saying that that's an average sum?
Different municipalities, they have different circumstances. I know some municipalities that have no reserves whatsoever, and I know have some that have billions. And so
Right.
it's all relevant to what you're trying to do with your capital asset and your maintenance plans, right? There's some municipalities that will tax every year just to put into that reserve for capital infrastructure, right? And they're very, very aggressive that way, and some don't. And so there is no real comparator that you can. It's your individual circumstance and your ability to service debt if that's that you choose, and also your ability to go after grants. I'm seeing a lot of grant payments for smaller municipalities, right, for special things. And so that's another avenue that actually has to be focused on. So it's reserves, debt, and trying to get grants. I mean, there's not as many grants as there used to be, but there's lots of these infrastructure things that are being announced. And so you just have to keep your eye on those grants and be able to write the grant documents and get in there and get the money.
Exactly, which our staff have been amazing at doing the last few years, but we didn't have a history of that, so they've done a wonderful job recently to getting us those grants. We've talked about at the UBCM and at AVICC for years this whole concept of a stable funding model that doesn't rely on grants as much, and I mean, we've sort of achieved that through the gas tax in that it's stable, predictable funding that we know we'll get every year, and that's spread fairly equitably throughout the province. But I'm wondering if that's changing. As you said, there is less and less grants being paid. Is that because we're shifting to a more sustainable, predictable model?
Not necessarily being paid. There are more being announced, but it's when they get announced is when they actually happen. There seems to be a disconnect of when the federal government especially has announced all this infrastructure financing and stuff, but you've yet to see it materialize. And so although it's good news they're announcing it, we don't know when it's coming. They seem to be shy on the information of when it's coming. But those are the things we need to watch for, is when is it coming and can we get some?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, given the age of our infrastructure, I think that that's another thing to throw in the balance with the funds we've set aside, as well as the age of the infrastructure. And I think a smaller community like this would have more challenge to meet those demands of the aging infrastructure. And so that's where I'm pleased we're moving towards an asset management plan to do that more long-term, equitable spreading out of the repayments over generations, which is another question I had, which was about that intergenerational fairness. Given that we see climate change coming or we're experiencing climate change impacts already, is there some anticipation as far as the MFA goes about the need for replacement, more rapid replacement of infrastructure through natural disaster? I know the MIA, the Municipal Insurance Authority, has spent a great deal of time and effort focused on trying to educate communities about the impacts of climate change and what natural disasters will do to their infrastructure and how they can prepare or mitigate. But are we prepared for I'm sure some communities in BC are already experiencing the aftermath of last summer and the fires, but is that something that you include in your predictions and conversations with the trustees and with the board?
So when we do talk to rating agencies, they're always very interested. Like I'm anticipating when we have a meeting this Thursday, I'm anticipating having to speak about the forest fires and what the effect was on the forestry and how that affects the local governments and their ability to generate. So those kinds of things are on the radar. But one of the things too, you talked about the financing. So going back to the forest fires, when that happened, The emergency response, like from the provincial government, is where the money came from, right? And of course, the federal government came in for that kind of a natural disaster as well. MIA, I don't think, had too much to do with that. I'm not sure, though. But going forward, you talked about the MIA and environmental and so forth. I once heard that they were doing insurance on linear assets, which are the ones in the ground, for towards natural disasters. But from an MFA point of view, we don't really touch the project. We only touch the money part, right? And so being prepared to talk to investors and so forth about how we mitigate those things, either through provincial agencies helping out in the case of disasters and so forth, that's how we approach it. Not so much from, the environment part and so forth, because we actually deal with the capital market side, which is just the money side, right?
So you're not worried about just having the urgency for the loan to replace infrastructure that's damaged through flooding or sea level rise or those kinds of impacts from climate change? Like, I just wonder if, say, the municipal hall is inundated because we've had a massive storm and we have to replace it, but urgently. Does that go through, obviously we would have the MIA insurance to rely on,
Right.
but I'm just wondering if there's some protection in place or some forethought that would allow us to borrow money should we need to not just replace this building, but to make it what maybe we want to see in the future, which would be, maybe combining it with the library or, adding some other more dynamic purpose to this building.
Sure. So accessing capital from the MFA, we've never had a problem accessing capital. So if you needed the money, we can get money. I'll give you an example. In the credit crisis in 2008, I remember because I was on the trading desk, and we're issuing debt, and the markets were closed except for 3 provinces and the MFA. So we've stood the test of time being able to getting money in capital market disruption, but we can always get the money, right? And so then it becomes a time, if you need money, it's more working with the ministry to make the loan go through faster, right? Because you have to appreciate we're at the end, not the beginning of the process.
So that 6-month period could be shortened through other measures.
It might be.
Okay.
Yeah, it
All
might
right.
be. And that would be the Ministry of Housing. That is their purview to do things like that, because it's actually their legislation
Right.
and their provisions that they're providing. I'm relaying the provisions, but the borrowing limits and so forth is a provincial provision. It's not
Right.
an MFA provision.
Okay.
We just have to monitor those things to keep the credit rating.
Great. Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. One more question came up in your comments relating to defined revenue sources. I know that's one item that's, I guess, is one big question mark, and don't quite know, certainly at this level yet, how the revenue is going to flow with respect to cannabis. I don't know if it's an unconditional grant that we're going to receive or a conditional grant. Is it going to be something like a gas tax that flows through to the local level? But at some point, some money, I presume, relating to cannabis sale and distribution will be flow down to the local level. Do you have a preview of how MFA will deal with that yet?
I have no preview, but it's an interesting question. It's now on my radar, though. Thank you.
All right. I think with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Thank you very much. Yeah, certainly. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things I think we should recognize is the work that people have done in the community, Mr. Horan and Mr. Herman, and one of the things we've done really well over the last little while is we have been successful in getting some very significant grants, and that is largely because they've worked to create what we'll call shelf-ready projects. And a lot of times these grants become available and we have a very, very short time in which to apply for them. And but there is a cost to being prepared and having those projects ready, and the staff actually have done a really good job, and that's something I know they're going to continue to work on. But at times we will come and talk to you about, the need to spend $10,000 or $20,000 to prepare something that there might not be any money for right at the time, but that is getting us ready for when grants become available. And I think over the last little while, you've seen the benefit of that to the tune of over, $2.5 million. So to the credit of Mr. Herman and Mr. Horan, they've done a great job there.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mayor Jensen?
Yeah, and just to emphasize it, Mr. Herman and his staff really were ready to jump on the Energy Loop project, which got us, I think, something in the over 600,000, nearly 700,000, and that has so many benefits. Not only it reduces any tax money we have to spend on it, because it was 100% dollars that we didn't have to contribute, but also to our GH, or greenhouse gas, has just plummeted to the point where we can now say that we're going to meet our green gas house reduction a year early. So there has so many different benefits, and so shelf, and I understand shelf ready is the same as shovel ready, which was something we used to use, but I think we're certainly served by our staff, and they have their shovels and their shelves ready. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so moving along to the second section, the Parks, Recreation, and Culture section. I'll invite Mr. Herman, our Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture, and the Chair of the Commission, Monty Holding. Welcome. All right, so we have the minutes of the Parks, Rec, and Culture Commission meeting of March 7th. And there are a couple of items for approval there. Did you want to give us an overview, Mr. Herman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the highlights of the meeting, there was a delegation from the Friends of Uplands Park and Wiley Thomas, who is our contractor who does a lot of the invasive species removal work, and they did their annual presentation to the Commission, and it was very well received and a lot of good dialogue, and certainly they were thanked for their continued efforts in the park. Then there were, I guess, a couple of items. One was the purchase of public art, the Lunar Transitions piece, which was the winner of the 2017 public voting process. And there were two parts to that report. One was for the Commission to approve the relocation of that piece to the small garden area right at the front of Monterey Center, which certainly from a staff perspective, and I think the Commission's as well, that would be an excellent site. And then there's a recommendation that came forward as well that Council would consider the purchase of that piece through the estimates process. Then the other approval that was required, the Ride Don't Hide event. It's an annual event given the direction from the Commission. Normally, if an event has taken place and there are no changes, it can be approved at a staff level. However, in this case, this year, the organizers have requested use of Windsor Park for start and finish and quite a significant setup. So that was a new wrinkle to that event. So that was brought forward to the Commission, and they did approve the use of the park for that event. Basically, all the rest of the information that was in front of the Commission were just monthly regular reports.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to remark that we have Barbara Adams, our Arts Laureate, in the audience as well. So if there are questions from committee regarding Lunar Transitions and the purchase, she's here representing the Public Art Advisory Committee. So were there any questions from committee? Councillor Ney? You have a question for Ms. Adams? Okay. If you could come up and join us, Barbara, that would be, Ms. Adams, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Through your
Councillor
chair
Ney?
to Ms. Adams, terrific that you got this this far, and it's a terrific piece. I absolutely agree, and I'm pleased to see it come to the top of the pile. I was just wondering if you could explain to us the process for adjudicating this. We know it went through vote, and if you could just tell us a bit about how the voting process works, and just for the public record. And then once that vote comes in, if you could tell us how the committee deals with the vote that comes in and whether there's any input. Okay.
Well, first of all, the art that is put out onto the street, the public art that's chosen to be exhibited, goes through an adjudication process at the very beginning. Before we have submissions, this year we had 30 submissions for the pieces that will be going out, and I believe last year we had 22 or 3. And so in the very beginning, the pieces that are chosen to go out are adjudicated for their technical, for their artistic value. That's what our committee specifically does. And then we involve Parks and Public Works to look at its technical stability, so that whether or not, in other words, whether or not it's suitable to be out in public. Then the pieces went out for the year, and we had voting boxes. We also had QR code voting, and we received a lot of votes last year. And the votes were collected from the boxes by our programmer, our culture programmer, and then the QR codes came into the media, or into our webman, and then at the end they were tallied up. And when they were tallied up, then we don't just automatically ask for that piece to be brought forward. Then it has to be looked at by Parks and Public Works to make sure that it's sustainable, that it's going to be something that is not going to be costing us a lot of money every year for its upkeep. Is it dangerous? Is it suitable to last a long time? Because the purpose of the public art is to build a legacy for Oak Bay. We want things that are going to last for a very long time. There are provisions in the public art policy, though, that things can be decommissioned should there be a problem, or should there be some reason to take it out. So is that a good enough answer?
Great. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you so much, Chair. So a question for the members of the commission. And this is more a question that I just want to put you on notice that a month from now I'll actually be asking this question. I don't need an answer today, but it has to do with the rugby field. Every once in a while I sort of ask about that rugby field, and I hear that something's happening, and then it's not happening, and then something's happening, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. So if you feel comfortable to say something about it today.
Councillor Zelka, are you referring to the high school?
Yeah, the rugby field, which is off of Oak Bay High School. That's right.
Okay.
And then an associated aspect would be the washroom that's there as well.
I'm not sure
I don't know
that's
whether
in
it's
order.
appropriate.
Yeah, that because it's not our property.
It's not our property, so we have no say on that aspect. I wasn't quite sure.
I can clarify with Mr. Herman, but I'm pretty sure that that's the district property.
Through the chair, correct, that is school district property, and I'm aware that they've not taken, they've never accepted that field. There are some challenges to the drainage and what have you, but beyond that, it's probably inappropriate for me to speak on that much further.
Thank you. Sorry. All right, Mayor Jensen?
I was just going to say, I think there's quite a bit of contention surrounding it, and who knows, these contentious issues often end up in litigation, but that's really not our bailiwick, so thank you.
All right, were there any other further questions?
I'd like to move minutes of the Oak Bay Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Commission for receipt be approved, and the recommendation with respect to the purchase of the Lunar transitions and the Ride Don't Hide be approved.
Great. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Okay. And if there's a second motion, does that cover both of it, Mr. Jones?
Your Worship, from my understanding, yes, that was to refer the purchase of the artwork to the Estimates Committee. And just for the benefit of the audience, this is something we've done a little bit differently this year in that in past we came forward with a separate report, but we're just trying to streamline things a little bit. So all those will go forward as one recommendation.
Thank you. Okay. So I've called the question on both questions, but before we wrap up this item, I just want to thank the Arts Laureate for the work that she did last year, and I'm very pleased that Lunar Transitions was the winner. It's always nice to be a part of the crowd that gets the one that you were cheering for, and so I think it's going to be a wonderful addition to Monterey Center. That's excellent choice for the location for something of that size, I think, and the committee's done some wonderful work with you to make that decision. So I appreciate that. And I also wanted to mention to the chair of the commission and Mr. Herman, just to obviously pass on our thanks to the Friends of Uplands Park and specifically Wiley Thomas for his efforts, because it is so noticeable. You walk through that park, Uplands Park looks entirely different from, say, 3 years ago. They are definitely winning the battle against invasives, and there's huge sections of the park that are now open, and it's not covered in ivy, and it's not, swathed in all other kinds of invasives. So it's just really, it's so noticeable. I think it looks beautiful, and I so appreciate their effort. So if you can pass on our thanks when and if you see them, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, and Councillor Croft?
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to mention that Acting Mayor Kirby has organized a Ride Don't Hide team that will represent the municipality in June, and we're welcoming donations and riders. And a little public announcement, but I'd really appreciate the support. Thank you.
Good catch. I forgot to do the promotion bit. I sent out my email, but yes, we would love your support. Thank you. I'll be doing the shortest ride, just so you know. I'm not doing a long haul, but a family ride would be, and you're welcome to join our team, which is the Unicyclists. Sorry, same as last year. Okay, thank you. All right, thanks for coming. Okay, so moving along to the next item, engineering services, or the next section, sorry. We have the first item on the engineering services items is Cadboro Bay bike lanes, Foul Bay Road to Bowker Avenue, and I'm so pleased that I get to be chair on this item. Thank you. Mr. Ran is here on holidays to speak to this item and provide us with an overview. Mr. Haran?
Thank you, Chair. After Council's selection in October 2017 of a preferred bike lane option for Cadboro Bay Road between Foul Bay and Bowker Avenue, staff worked to refine some of the details and address some concerns raised in the discussion. So we're back tonight to provide an update on some of those issues. The first one is the design drawings were updated to reflect the new configuration of the Oak Bay High School. Number two, we explored some options to reinforce the separation between the bike lanes and travel lanes as best we could, which is now reflected into the new drawings. Number three, we addressed concerns raised by residents in the Committee of the Whole, especially Epworth and Florence streets around traffic. So we've now spun off those concerns into a separate transportation-related project that involves meeting with the residents, conducting traffic counts, proposing potential changes, and that's kind of a separate issue now that it's ongoing. And the final task, which is to provide the Committee of the Whole with an update on project scope options with associated costs. So the task that's driving what we're doing there around scope and costs is balancing the life cycle of this project. So you have the new bike lane paint, essentially, is what you're talking about, and the asphalt services underneath. So what we're trying to do in providing the options is meet Council's aim around what the bike lanes look like, and then maximize the useful life of the investment and get best value for money. So in the report, Table 1, it's labeled Scope and Cost Options. What I'm going to do is just walk everyone through that just a little bit so that it shapes the discussion, so that the questions that are asked, I can kind of explain it a little bit if it's not clear. So we consider the detailed design, that's attachment 1, as the baseline scope of the project. So that's the design that we're doing, that's in terms of the separation, and the costs around it are set as the baseline. That's $156,319. But we don't recommend as a district to spend that money without improving some of the road surfaces underneath, because the paint itself, the project is quite expensive, and in some areas, if the road surface is not rehabilitated, within 2 or 3 years we'd have to redo that paint, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in the table we have at the top what I'll call the most expensive solution, which is a solution that fully resurfaces Cadboro Bay Road between Foul Bay and Bowker, restores all the sidewalks to standard, and that would cost about $585 or $584,019, and then add on to that the baseline bike lane costs of $156,319. The shaded or grayed out options in the table are the recommended staff options. So the first one is the baseline bike lanes, $156,000, plus a partial road resurfacing of $73,644, grand total of $229,963. The other option, which is very similar, is to reduce the amount of MMA. That's the green conflict zone treatment. So that would mean, in the case that's quoted there in the table, is only the north side of Cadboro Bay Road at Foul Bay Road, and then the south side of Cadboro Road at Cranmore. So that's reducing the cost of the MMA to do the whole project, and reducing the costs of the road resurfacing required. So it's basically $60,000 cheaper, at a grand total of $156,283. A couple of other things to mention, just that's in the report, is we did do a Bike BC grant application, which would, if the grant is awarded, cover 50% of the baseline costs of the project. So in conclusion, we have a shelf-ready project. The project cost, as represented, is much larger than the typical amount for what we would spend in a year for transportation-related projects, and it's not currently part of the 2018 budget plan, and would need to be added by council to the plan for the year during the estimates process. So therefore, the staff recommendation is that the decision be referred to the estimates committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horan. All right, so are there questions for Mr. Horan from the committee? Mayor Jensen?
If this does go to the estimates committee, perhaps at that juncture we can have some kind of options as to what, if any, reserves would qualify to pay for some or all of this project, because I know there was some alternative transportation reserve. So we have that reserve report. So if that can kind of accompany this motion, if it passes to estimates. Thank you.
Thank you. You took the question from my mouth, actually, because I actually had that exact question. Why, as mentioned in the report, that this would be not funded and may have a significant impact on taxes, to quote your report, that why not use that fund to pay for this rather than, so that's just an option?
That's a decision that can be made at estimates when we balance all of the demands.
Okay, so there we go.
If it goes to estimates.
If it goes to estimates. Right. Councillor Croft.
I'm just, to Mr. Horan, I'm wondering if you could just go over this green paint thing again, just so I'm really clear about, where this paint's going and where it's not going, and what the difference in your view to a cyclist, because I know you're a cyclist, might make in having both sides painted green as opposed to only the north side painted green, if I've got that correct?
Through you, Chair. So it's difficult for me to weigh in terms of how much MMA treatment that the council will want to have in there, because that's a part of it's a scope question, and it's the purpose of the MMA treatment, as you'll see it in most of the places that I can think of in the region, the places I'm familiar with. The whole purpose of the green treatment is more about giving drivers a visual reminder that they're crossing, or there's a potential conflict with where the driver in the vehicle is and where the bicyclists are. So the design that we have in front of you in the attachment, the detailed design, is meant to, the amount of green treatment in there, and in the process that we were working to develop this detailed design, we were debating the amount that you would put in there. And this is a good solution for what you would want to have based on current standards. However, there's some leeway in there. So the reduced cost, the 60,000 less, is staff's opinion on, well, if you didn't have the full amount, what would be best? And so what's best is to cover the conflict zones that are close to the busiest part of the stretch, which would be where Foul Bay Road and Foul Bay Road and Cadboro Bay Road are. And then there's that, as you look at the curve heading northbound, where Cranmore is, that's another area where we really think that should, the green conflict zone should be as a minimum.
Thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you. Yeah, my questions were kind of around the green paint as well. And so my first question would be, is painting that green paint over long stretches like that best practice? Because it seems that it's much longer than any of the other stretches that I've seen in other jurisdictions like Victoria used. Is that correct, or?
Through you, Chair, I haven't done any scientific comparisons in terms of the length of time, or the length of how much compared to other places. I have anecdotal opinions, but I don't think that's worth a whole lot. So I guess I'll just say that where this design and compared to the accepted standards comes from is our consultant who are using the standard practices, as well as our design engineer who's a transportation expert who, in terms of being able to debate from the district's perspective, is this enough? Is that not enough? And then myself, not as a technical expert, but just as an advocate to say, to really push from a customer's perspective, is this really what we want? Is that the standard? What's the minimum? What's the maximum required? So what we've given you as options capture in all those different perspectives.
Thank you. And then one more question, if I may. I noticed that there's no green paint at the driveway entrance and exit to the school parking lot, which I would have considered maybe a high conflict area. So perhaps there's an explanation around that too.
Through you, Chair, that's a very good question, and I don't actually have a good answer for you at this time. So I will go back and just confirm. What I need to do is confirm that we looked at that as in terms of that thought process was incorporated into the design, and push back out an answer to you.
Okay, thank you. And then just finally, I'm sorry, I missed what fund you were talking about for that for this to come from. Sorry.
From memory, I think it's called Alternative Transportation Reserve Fund, I think.
And is that where does that money? Is that just from our gas taxes, or?
Ms. Carter?
I think Ms. Carter would be a good one to answer that one.
No, through the chair, it's not through gas taxes. It's funds that were set aside, pulled from a different reserve fund back in 2008, I believe.
If I can, through you, Chair, it's not the parking fund, is it? The parking reserve fund?
Through the chair, it is not the parking fund. There was one fund that we were allowed to pull some money out of to create an alternative transportation reserve, and that was done.
Thank you.
Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I very much appreciate the report. Very, very clear, and I appreciate the drawings. Just wanted to confirm this, the MMA thing. I noticed when I was coming south on Henderson, just before it reaches Lansdowne on the Camosun College corner, right across from where the work's being done on the water pipe. There's a conflict zone there, a very short green painted area. The rest of it's not painted, but there's just a short green painted area. I presume that's similar to the MMA thing that you're referring to here. I just wanted to try and tie it in with something that I've seen already on the road.
Through the chair, if I recall, that's correct. I believe that the treatment that was done at Lansdowne intersection is the MMA treatment that we're expecting. There's other places where you'll see that it's just green paint and so on, not quite the same thing. So that if I recall, that's what we've got there.
Move receipt to council. Move to receipt to send to estimates. Recommendation
Seconds.
1.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. The recommendation. I'm assuming that was the recommendation. I have a couple questions. Mr. Horan, where is this section? So if we were to choose the resurfacing of Cadboro Bay Road and fully replace the sidewalks to get them to current standards, do you was part of the assessment process where this lies in the priority? Because I know that all of our sidewalks are already in a priority, and the roads as well. Was that part of your assessment?
Yes, it was, Chair. Part of the assessment was the condition of Cadboro Bay Road from Foul Bay to Bowker, where there's some stretches that need to be patched, I guess is the term I'll use, and other places it's actually in quite good shape. And then in terms of other priorities for road surfacing repair, they're higher. So the staff thought was a full resurfacing is not really of good value for money in the district at this time. And then in terms of the sidewalk, the issue there is that over the years, as that stretch of road's been patched or paved over, there's, first of all, the sidewalks themselves are starting to be a little bit on the end of life cycle type of condition, I'll say. And then the curbs heights and so on are starting to be out of standard. But again, in terms of the broad picture priority, it's probably lower on the priority scale.
Okay, and as far as water mains and infrastructure under the ground, are those areas that will need replacement in the near future?
So, Chair, yes, we had thought of that, and so what we did before we came in November was just make an assessment of underground infrastructure that's required in the area, and I don't recall which asset class it was. There was, so we looked at sewer, storm, and water, and two of those asset classes were good to go for quite a long time, and then one of them there was required replacements in the next 10 or 15 years, but based on the assessment of the other priorities that are much higher than that, we were not aiming to lump in underground infrastructure changes with any road resurfacing at that time in terms of a complete streets approach. So in other words, short answer, no underground infrastructure requirement to tie in with this road project.
Okay, thank you. I know that you took all that into consideration in the assessment process, but I couldn't remember what you said in the fall when we talked about that. And I just want to make sure that as we move to estimates, that we're able to take all that into consideration when, we would like this to be a showcase of our streets, and also, but at the same time, as we saw from from the correspondence received, that it's not to the AAA standard, all ages and abilities, according to those people that wrote. And so I'm just concerned that if we spend, depending on how much we spend, I'm trying to weigh, what will we do in the future? What can we do to that corridor in the future as far as an upgrade to the infrastructure, and to encourage more cyclists to the schools especially, and at the same time without spending too much now and restricting our ability to improve it down the road, because I'd love to see that we have an all ages and abilities network started in Oak Bay, and I think this is certainly the first step. So I really, really appreciate the work you've done on this. It's very exciting. So thank you. I think with that, I'm going to go to the public. Were there any comments or questions from the public on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Great. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Portland does green lanes. The entire lane is green. So, and I've been in that lane with my kids, and for some reason, paint feels safe. It's a strange perception, but that's anecdotal evidence, of course. So moving along to the next item, which is the asset management update. Again, our Director of Engineering, Mr. Haran, can provide us with an update or an overview, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was 2 previous discussions, Committee of the Whole in March 2017, and then Committee of the Whole in November 2017, which was the asset management update. And at the end of that brief, there was a slide that had a number of ways ahead related to asset management. The first one was obtain better, more accurate info with respect to aging assets. Number 2 was develop long-term capital improvement plan. Number 3 was develop long-term financial plan. And number 4 was around governance structure, create policy, strategy, and plans to formalize Council's intent for sustainable service delivery. So attachment 1 of the report tonight is again the report on asset management practices from Opus Consulting Canada Limited. And 2 of the high priority tasks under the category of people, governance, leadership, and staff in that report were develop an asset management policy and develop an asset management strategy. So a policy is, the way we're approaching this is to quote, a document that broadly outlines the principles and mandated requirements for undertaking asset management across the organization in a systematic, coordinated way with the organization's plans. So for us here in Oak Bay, the key principles are we're trying to achieve an end state of sustainable service delivery. We're using the Asset Management BC framework for sustainable service delivery as a guideline for how we're going to approach this. We're using innovation made in Oak Bay solutions to achieve these aims. We're going to do program or project management best practices to plan and deliver these key requirements. And eventually, we're going to, these projects will deliver changes that are adopted as our normal way of doing business in Oak Bay. So the asset management strategy is, and again I quote, a high-level approach to asset management, including asset management plans and objectives for managing assets. So how are we going to make this happen here? All of the activities the district needs to do to attain sustainable service delivery, both in the short term and the longer term, are essentially projects. So these are activities with a defined beginning and end that accomplish a specific goal. And a program in the project management world is a group of related projects managed in a coordinated way. So the district's asset management strategy that we're talking about tonight is the document that has the high-level approach to how we're going to tackle asset management and incorporate these best practices into our ways of doing business. So what we've done is provide a program charter. So the program charter is normally the document that consolidates all the available information about a program. So those are justification, vision, strategic fit, expected outcomes, scope, benefit strategy, assumptions, limitations, risks, time scale, stakeholder considerations, and governance, as well as resources. So, okay, a made in Oak Bay solution. So let's do that, but with some agility. So we're creating a living document at this stage that describes all the things that we have done, are doing, and still need to do to achieve your asset management aims. So some of the program components in the strategy that are worth highlighting tonight are, for one of them, is the condition assessment program. So some of this is already underway, sanitary sewer and storm sewer, closed circuit television and condition assessment project. So we're in the 3rd year of a 3-year contract, and now the issue is how do we move forward in the best way? What is the requirement? Do we do more or less, or is that enough? Is it affordable? What's the recommendation? What's the plan? Another component that's worth discussing tonight is the asset management plans themselves. Water master plan, sewer, storm, roads, facilities. So the water master plan is a good example of one that's underway, in progress for this year. So we're developing the computer water model to assess flows and capacities, reconcile this information with age and condition assessment, and develop a prioritized list of the projects to tackle. So it informs our capital investment plans and allows us to plug into a long-term financial plan. And then we do more. There's some others that haven't been started yet, so sewer or storm, for example, which need to be done at some point. In the short term, another example is the building and facilities initial plan, which means initial proposal from staff with respect to facility upgrades and replacements that are required, initial discussions with council around these options, priorities, facility timelines, funding sources, and plans, all feeding into a council-endorsed facilities plan. So there's a significant level of effort that's required that's captured here in all these different programs and components to achieve the final program aims. So going forward, an asset management strategy is a program charter that captures the high-level approach, how we're going to make these asset management best practices part of how we do our business day to day. Practically, it's a group of projects, some of which are already done, some are underway, and others with scope and schedules yet to be defined. So these activities now are not yet part of our day-to-day work. During strategic priorities discussions that have been held in this room, the guideline of 90% of staff's level of effort were been focused on day-to-day operational commitments. And so therefore, a lot of these projects that we're talking about have to be considered as falling into the 10% of staff effort considered broadly within the strategic priorities going forward. And that's my intro.
Thank you, Mr. Horan. All right, so are there questions from committee? Councillor Ney?
Start this. Thank you very much, Mr. Horan. This is, thank you for the explanation around the policy and strategy attachments here. That's helpful. Just a couple questions here right now is, one of the questions I had on the program components that you laid out in the tabulation there has to do with the decision-making dashboards. Can you explain what that means, what that looks like? What is that you're referring to? I saw it in the Opus report referred to, but what does that actually mean in operationally?
Through you, Chair, the best way to think about that is I'll just pick a time in the future so we don't talk about how much effort and timelines, but at some point in the future, the council needs to be able to, whether it's during the estimates process or in the time leading up to the estimates process, be able to see what the requirement is in terms of infrastructure replacements, and then be able to make good decisions about how much to fund and what to do year to year. So that's what we mean by, when we call it a decision-making dashboard, it means a roll-up of all the information, condition assessments, age, staff recommendation, everything else that you could think of that would help the council decide we should fund this many projects this year or do more or less or whatever it is. And then incorporates things like risk management and other factors. So right now, what you have at the estimates is that you get the same kind of information that's brought forward when we provide, here's the capital plan for 2018, for example. But a lot of the, there's not a lot of opportunity to do more or less and to balance the risks with all the information. So that's the longer term, what we're trying to achieve, to let council make the decisions with all the information in front of them. And in the short term, the idea is to provide at least a preview of what that might look like. So just for the purposes of saying, okay, this is what's coming, or this is what it might look like, because there's a lot of significant level of effort required before we're capable of providing those kinds of decision-making tools.
That's helpful. Yeah, it just is going to take into account the complexity of the decision-making process to help us out with that. Okay, so just one other question here. Can you help me understand this sequencing and how this will roll out in terms of how we decide on how these different asset management plans that you've listed under 2.0 in your program component grid? How do we make the decision about how they're going to get paid and attach numbers to them? When does that happen, or do we just start with, like, you've got water master plan, do we just do that and then just kind of walk through one by one, or is there some sense of the whole picture? Because we've got to deal with all of it, obviously. So how does that financing part work in terms of the planning?
Through you, Chair, a good portion of why things are set up the way they are in there is part of based on what's been done already. And in a lot of the things that have been done already were the right things to do already. For example, the condition assessment program, the contract, the 3-year contract to do storm and sewer assessments is a really great thing to have already underway. And if it wasn't, we'd be saying we really need to do this. So that's in terms of the ordering of what's happening there. The numbering in terms of the program components is meant to, you know, as you see at the beginning, there's the foundations, which is meant to capture the stuff that has happened to get us to this point, really. Now it's about staff coming back with the recommendations of, well, here's the next project that needs to be activated. So, which we've already done in some ways. So the water master plan was part of the 2018 budget in terms of the water rates, and then which there's still some room to have discussions at the estimates portion. But our plan recommendation for the year is do the following things, and there's a number of reasons why that is. The next parts in terms of the things that make the most sense to do next are kind of sequenced in that table as well, to give some information of these are what we recommend you do next. And following that will be, hey, there's some other projects that should be funded, and but we would need to come back to you the way we would with any project and say, here's the scope of the project, this is the aim, and this is the expected cost, and it should be done in this particular year. And that's comes down to a program manager, which is a staff member, to say, here's what needs to be next, and here's the decision that we need the council to make.
That's very helpful. So if I've understood you, then the financial plan will be presented to council for each master plan that you've laid out there. Is that how that works?
So the way when it comes to the engineering services infrastructure, when we talk about a water master plan or a sewer master plan or a storm master plan, normally those are done where you factor in all the information that you would want to have to put a prioritized list together of which sewer pipes or water pipes you want to repair first. But the thing that keeps it from being a complete plan is it's not incorporated into the long-term financial plan yet. So once that, you know, that part's done first, and then you have to connect with finance and come back with here's what we want to do over the next X amount of years, how many we're going to do per year. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
All right. Any other questions from committee? Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair, and sincere thanks for this absolutely wonderful implementation of best practices in asset management. I very much appreciate what our Director of Engineering Services and his team has done. I just, almost a silly question to start. Where on this circular diagram are we today on the asset management framework? Are we in assess, plan, or implement yet? Or is it really a circular process that just keeps going and going and going?
Through you, Chair, that's a really good question. What's the second one again? I think it's plan, is it not?
Assess, plan, implement.
Yeah, so it is meant to be a spiral model, right? So you're going to cycle through all of those. So I think it's a very difficult question for me to answer, but it is meant to be not, you know, you spin around once and then you're done.
Right.
So we're always going to be, you know, cycling through. And we've done that cycle a number of times in the last 2 or 3 years, I think, as we implement certain parts like plan, deliver, implement, reassess, and carry on. So that's part of the what I meant by innovative or agile solutions, you know, not to use terms that are loaded in other contexts, but definitely there's a lot of things that you could do that follow all the best practices that don't necessarily move us faster in the direction we want to go. So that's definitely, we're trying to do that here, where we say, okay, what is the work that needs to be done? How do we allow council to make good decisions on what's happening next? How do we how do we get there, and then reassess what's next.
And one more question, if I may, please, Chair. Through you, with respect to the table in the strategy document, strategy document, having to do with data quality management standards. I noticed that you say it's in progress for the GIS quality or the GIS data at least that's up on the website. I just wanted to point out that a developer that works almost exclusively at Oak Bay, when I was chatting with him about a project coming up and we wanted to pull up some GIS data, he immediately went to the CRD website, and I said, hold on a second. You go to the Oak Bay website. He says, well, they don't have GIS data. I said, yes, they do. And I was amazed. He was amazed. He fell off his chair when he saw the quality of the data that's there on the website today for the GIS work that you've done. So again, kudos and compliments to your team for the work that's been done. And it seems like it's done to me, but I guess quality of data is always something that's in progress. So thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you. Yes, also thanks from me for this report. This is obviously one of the largest, most important things coming up in the municipality over the next little while. So I have a couple of questions through you, Chair, if I might. The first one would be, is there room in this plan to change projects or to react to identified priorities? So, for example, if there's pipes on the verge of failing or something, or matching priorities to grant opportunities with a focus to kind of drive the cost to taxpayers down. Is there room in there for that?
Through you, Chair, absolutely. The intent around the plans is not to create a list of projects that will never change. And so, and this is what happens now, actually, and has happened for several, for I don't know how long, I won't say since I've been here, at least even, where we said, okay, 2018 is going to look like this. We're going to do this project and that project, and something will have changed that says, okay, that doesn't make sense to do what originally planned. We're going to do this other thing, and often it comes down to, the condition assessments. If sometimes the assets fail, and all of a sudden they move to the top of the priority list. So definitely, it's not meant to handcuff the district into only doing what's in the plan. It's meant to make better decisions and to get good value for money going forward. Another part of it is making sure that you don't have say a sewer main replacement that probably maybe has 15 more years of life available. You want to get maximum value out of the life cycle of the assets that the district has.
So that actually kind of leads into my next question, if I might, Chair. And that would be, how will the interrelated projects be checked to ensure that disruption is only done once? So, for example, if we're replacing the water main, and then in 10 years we know that the sewer pipe has to be replaced, and in 15 years we know that the road has to be resurfaced. So how do we kind of group those together and get the biggest bang for our buck, I guess?
Through the Chair, that's a good best practice in whether it's asset management or in the civil engineering. Part of the product that we get from our contractor that does the CCTV work for storm and sewer, for example, is we'll have all the information, but one of the things is they reconcile, overlap. Hey, maybe there's a lower priority storm main that needs to be replaced in the next 10 years that's matched up with the same street and location as a sewer, the opposite of what I said the first time. That needs to be replaced right away. And so that now all of a sudden the recommendation, so we have that as part of the data that we use to assess priority and to try to add those two together. And the transportation aspect is the same, where we would want to rehabilitate the roads at the same time. So that's part of the decision-making process when we prioritize and come up with the master plans.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I think by transportation, you didn't mean just roads, you meant sidewalks and other active transportation
Absolutely.
priorities.
Yep.
Just adding that in there for color. Okay, if there are no further questions from the committee, I'll move to the public. Were there any questions or comments? Come on up. Join us. As Ms. Patterson obviously knows, she has to write her name down so that we get the spelling correct in the minutes, but if anybody else wishes to join us, please make sure to write your name down. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And first off, thank you very
need to
much.
introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry.
right?
You did.
For those
Esther
at home.
Patterson, Woodlawn Crescent. And I'd like to thank Ms. Carter and Mr. Haran for putting this together tonight. It was nice to finally put a face to a name at the Municipal Financing Authority, and I was very pleased to see the reports. I did just chase Ms. Hahn out to the vestibule because if I can step back for a minute, there were a couple of questions that I associate with risk management that I just wanted to confirm with her. And that was that I asked her about the more normalized rate of what the interest has been, because we've been at very low cap rates for a long time now. And so that was about 5%. And when I look at some of the numbers she presented, our delays of over several years now at low interest rates amount to, if you look at the $20 million, that's about $100,000 a difference at a 1% change. So that's $100,000 a year more for every percent we go up. So that's why it's important that we move forward with this. I think there seems to be some confusion about debt and reserves and how you do it. And I guess the most simple explanation is newer communities will often have high debt and low reserves, and aging communities will have high reserves and lower debt. And fortunately for Oak Bay, we are in a very admirable position of having low debt, but it's also a bad news story because we're going to be, for every point you go up in interest rates, it's $100,000 a year. So you quickly lose any benefit that you've had. One thing that she did say, though, too, is because I asked about the just default, because, of course, it's backstopped by everybody that's in the cooperative. And she said basically their set target is they will not go below a 50% rate in their reserves. So that's very good to know. And that they are, in fact, using the money in the reserves to build up, because they make interest on it. Their goal is to build up the reserves so that they actually backstop 100% of anything that's loaned, so that reduces the risks even further. And they're keeping accumulating that every year, or reducing the cost to any of the members that are involved. So, again, minimizes the risk to the municipality. And you may recall that when I talked about reserve funds a couple meetings ago, I suggested perhaps we consider a reserve fund for early debt retirement. So one thing I wanted to ask her about was early retirement of debt. We do have that option. And basically, if you take out funding through the MFA for anything, so it goes beyond 10 years, at the 10-year mark, you actually could retire your debt early. There's no advantage before that because at low cap rates and they present value it, so there's not much benefit there. But if you're refinancing, which is basically what you're doing at the 10-year mark, you come down to the lower 5-year rate. So if you were at a 4% rate for a 15-year loan, once you get to the 10-year part, you're then going to the 5-year, so your loan amount drops too. So those are all important things I think that we know moving forward. I liked a lot of the report that Mr. Haran put together. I like the fact that it's really a living document. There's a lot of flexibility in it, and those are very good things because there has to be flexibility. You're going to have your long-term planning, but you're going to also have your operational challenges that come up every year. It seems to me now that really we're almost at an impasse where we don't really have established for the community a funding model for this. And so in order to go forward and predict what you're going to do and how you're going to roll it out, you need to have some idea of the magnitude of any funding that you're going to have to work with, because you can't consider how you will go out even for bids, how you will talk to firms that are going to do this work, until you can understand how much you can go out and do at one time and how you will organize it. So that has to be a bit of a limiting factor now. Unless you have that, you're going to have real difficulty in merging your operational and your capital depreciation budgets to get us to a big picture on these items. Is that fair, Mr.? I'm just wondering, through you, Chair, if we could have
Mr.
Mr.
Horan?
Horan.
Through you, Chair, I'm not. I was wondering if you could repeat the question a little bit, because
Well-
I've been listening, but I'm not quite sure how to answer.
If from you've set out what you want to do, and you know you've kind of mapped it out, but really I would think that you're at the point now where, until you understand what kind of funding you have to work with, so how you will group the projects, how you will define the logistics for it, and prepare to go further for tendering or even just early discussions perhaps with consultants and contractors. You have to know the magnitude of what you're going to work with, because there's going to be a big difference, I would think, if you're going to do $5 million worth of work or $10 million worth of work, or if you could commit to, we plan in this community to go forward and spend $5 million each year over 5-year periods, or just, you don't have the financial component yet to work with. You've got more of the bricks and mortar and all of those things, but not the funding model that will allow you to really determine how to go forward.
Through you, Chair, I think that's correct, and there's more to it than that, and I think that's why the approach that staff took in helping council have a way forward on this one is that it is complex. There is an aspect of the financial, Ms. Patterson, that you're talking about. There's also a matter of finding opportunities to create, to have those decision-making discussions, which is where we talked about the dashboards earlier. So really, all the things that are in that list that is in this program is meant to get us from here to there. And none of them can happen without, they all have to work in tandem. So the having a really rock solid plan for sewer pipes that need to be replaced in terms of priority and order and knowing what they are is helpful, but is not helpful enough until you've tied it into a long-term financial plan, which is part of the program as well. So what that means is, how does it fit in? How do the sewer stuff fit in with everything else? What are the funding? How are you going to fund that? And a lot of those are things that council needs to decide, but needs to be given the information for them to do it. So this program is really about, not trying to say we're going to be able to do this in 2 weeks, but it's trying to put some order around the complexity and give a way forward to say this is what the expectation should be going forward in terms of how much effort and when we can do better at this.
And again, through you, Chair, then that, if you can refine this more, then you get down to working that dashboard so that you actually have an impact on taxes today and going forward over the years of that project's amortization. Correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Are there any other comments or questions from the committee, or from the public? Okay. Okay, I think I'm looking for a motion then, if there are no further comments. Councillor Ney? To approve it.
Okay, but I do have a question to follow up, if I may.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay. All right, Councillor Ney?
So in through you, Chair, to probably Ms. Carter, if that's okay. In the Opus report, on the next steps on page 22, they recommend a financial plan. And it's kind of a bit of the question I was getting at with Mr. Horan, but I just like if Ms. Carter, through your chair, could speak to this. help me understand, because one of their recommendations is to provide an evidence-based projection of asset renewal costs for at least 20-year period. And I'm wondering if you could speak to where is that, like when does that happen? I'm not questioning that it's not now. I mean, it's a very, very good beginning. Help me understand where that comes into play.
Through the chair, so I've been working very closely with Mr. Haran on this asset management report and the previous reports that have come forward, and we both work closely together. It needs, as he stated, it all needs to happen side by side. You can't do one without the other, and so as we gain more information, then we can look at possible funding plans. And our our long-term financial plans will improve as we move forward down this path.
Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, a similar question relating to the next steps. I appreciated the note from Ms. Patterson, which suggested that once assets are put in place or upgraded, there's often operational costs related. As part of your the financial plan you'll be bringing forward relating, it does speak specifically about assets in there. I presume there'll be an operational component that might be factored into this process. I just wondered if you could possibly comment on that and also maybe how you do that. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair. So again, as we move down the path of asset management and the condition assessments, we can look at that time and determine what the operating cost will be. So each one will need to be reviewed individually. They're not all going to be the same, and it's not going to be a cookie cutter approach. So we have our work cut out for us.
All right, are there any other further comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, I'm going to just add my thanks to both of you for Mayor Jensen. I'll just wrap up. I'll wrap up first, and then you can ask your question. Okay. I just wanted to thank you for this work. This has huge implications for future councils to make better decisions and look after our community in a way that's a little more sustainable and better planned, and it's so reassuring to know that this work is being done. And I know that it's taken a huge effort to get to this place, and I know that there's also other projects ongoing and there's a lot on your plate. So I want to express my gratitude, not just from council, but from the community, because I think you're really laying the groundwork for some really great things ahead. And it's very reassuring as somebody who wants to stay in Oak Bay to know that it's all going to be looked after, and I don't have to lay it in bed at night worrying that we're going to face some real financial challenges in the future, if not infrastructure challenges. So it's great work. Thank you. And Mayor Jensen?
Very much along those lines, I was going to note that this is an important step forward. And it really is on a project we've been working on for the last 3 years, started in 2015, and it has been a clear priority of council. And I'm just looking at Mr. Haran's report under strategic impact, where he says, preparing an asset management plan remains a 2017-2018 council strategic priority that aims to help, quote, develop, maintain, and protect our infrastructure. And so I know this isn't, these kind of things aren't sprints or even middle distance, that we're playing in the long term. And I think I mentioned earlier that about the water infrastructure, that when that commission was looking at long run, they were looking at 50 and 100 years. And we're certainly going to be looking at the long run, not the 1 or 2 year window. So I'm very grateful also too for the staff's work. I think it really moves us along the path very well. So thank you.
Great. All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Okay, moving to the next section. Mr. Haran, you're no longer in the hot seat. It now moves to land use applications. So the next two applications have all been through our advisory bodies for review and comment before coming to committee of the whole. The first one is the Uplands Siting and Design application for 3235 Beach Drive. And just, I guess we'll ask you, Ms. Jensen, for an overview. Thank you.
Certainly. This particular application is to modify a 1958 John DeCastry designed home. In combination with an interior renovation, the applicant is proposing to expand and realign a portion of the front face of the existing home, which will alter the existing angle of the front entry. The front terrace area will also be expanded to better utilize the front yard and incorporate an accessibility ramp, and a set of stairs will be constructed on the opposite side of the garage. The application was reviewed by the advisory design panel at 3 of their meetings to achieve a final design that respected the DeCastry home. Some final recommendations were provided by the panel at their March 6th meeting, including realigning one portion of the stairs along the front of the terrace and minimizing guardrails for the ramp area as much as possible. Those suggestions have been incorporated into the plans that you have in front of you. Staff have reviewed the application with respect to the site characteristics in the neighborhood. The front yard of the property is actually quite private. The proposed renovations are nowhere near any of the adjacent neighbors nor the trees that are located on the site, and the design complements the existing home quite nicely. So staff are requesting council direction.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. Okay, I'm just going to remind committee that 3 of us visited the site this morning, so if there are any specific questions, we may also be able to offer expertise. If the committee determines that this is ready to proceed, it will be included for consideration as part of the committee of the whole minutes at the council meeting on March 26th. So, are there any questions from committee?
Move the staff recommendation.
Before we do that, we have to see if the applicants are in attendance. Yes? Okay, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, you don't need to rush up here. We're just wanting to make sure that if there were any questions that you were here. And so if there is anyone from the public that wants to speak to this item or ask questions, I'd ask you to come up now, but I see no one. Okay, all right, so Mayor Jensen?
We were out this morning. It was a beautiful day, and it's a stunning piece of property with the view. And one of the things that struck me about the changes is it really very much is in keeping with the original design. It's almost as if the original design should have been that. So I think they've done a very good job, and it is a very special house. And it's going to be more unique as others want to have 2 and 2.5 story houses. So I think we should all be grateful for that. The sort of new owner, I understand, is staying in the family, has decided to renovate and upgrade, so we don't lose this wonderful DeCastry house. Yeah. So. Our community is grateful for the renovation as opposed to what the alternative could have been. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I think we have a motion on the floor. Okay. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Thank you. And I agree. The view is amazing, and they have the most perfect Gary Oak I've ever seen. It was rounded. It was not, Gary Oak. Unique. Thank you. All right. The next item is a development variance permit. Permit application for 2368 Dalhousie Street. So I'll get an overview from you, Ms. Jensen.
This particular development variance permit application is to permit construction of a single-family home. The house itself is actually under construction now, meets all the requirements of the zoning bylaw with the exception of roof height. Through building inspection, it was determined that when the roof trusses were installed, an error that showed up on the building plans resulted in additional roof height on one specific portion of the building. So the application was reviewed at the March 6th meeting of the Advisory Planning Commission, where the commission supported the application but did confirm that neighbors would be notified of the proposed variance. The variance itself for that specific portion of the building results in about 0.23 meters, about 1 foot. Staff have reviewed that request in context with the neighborhood, which really does have a mix of housing styles and heights ranging from 1 to 2 stories. The portion of the building that is over height, really in the central portion, unlikely to have any immediate impact on the adjacent lots.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. Are there any questions from committee? Is the applicant in the audience? Hi, thanks for coming. Are there any questions from the public or comments? No? Okay. So I'll look for a motion.
I'll move the staff recommendation and that notification be given.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
Yeah, just one quick question in regards to something that was in the item, and it refers to the canopy cover. I know it's not about the roof height, but it is under this item, and it's from the municipal arborist, and it does say that he has seen no landscape plan for this property, so he has no idea if they're planning to achieve proposed canopy cover. Is there something that they need to prove that they're going to have canopy cover, or no?
I think we only see that in a larger application, but I could ask Ms. Jensen to clarify. When do we get a landscape plan, and what kind of applications?
So with Council's endorsement of the urban forest management strategy, there is no specific tree bylaw in effect yet that would address how we are moving forward with tree canopy cover. As each new application comes in, we are having those initial discussions with them to determine what it might look like on the site.
Right, so I just brought it up because it was mentioned in the arborist, so it's good to get that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. All right, if there are no other comments or questions, I just want to make one comment myself that this is the second time we've seen this in the last year, where a truss has been built too high and the client has had to come back, or the resident has had to come and ask for a variance, and I just find that really alarming and unfortunate. And so I feel that's maybe something, I don't even know how we begin to address that as a regulatory body, but it just sort of seems strange. If it's a coincidence, I don't know, but or is there a trust company that's not measuring things accurately? I don't know. I can't help but notice that that's the second time this year, and I hope it's not. And we won't see any more like that, because it certainly sounds rather unpleasant. But the house is beautiful, so a wonderful addition to the street. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you. So that wraps up our building and planning section. And now, Mr. Horan, you truly are out of the hot seat. And we move on to regulatory items. So the number 7 is an advisory planning commission process considerations. So this is a report from Mr. Jones, our Director of Corporate Services, and I would ask you to provide us with an overview, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Advisory Planning Commission is an organization, an agency that Council set up a couple of years ago to help it consider land use applications, and it's been in existence for a couple of years. So on March 5th, the Council and APC met to talk about things that are working well and things that there may be opportunities to change. And so after that meeting, I think there was general agreement on a number of things, and I won't go into detail, but I'm happy to ask any questions. There was talk about a new APC procedures manual that the Commission has done a lot of good work on, and the idea would be that come back to Council once it's complete for Council's endorsement. There was an agreement that what I'll call routine or minor applications that go to the APC should perhaps be considered going directly to the Committee of the Whole or Council. There was a suggestion that rezoning and official community plan amendments be first considered by the Committee of the Whole rather than first going to the Advisory Planning Commission. And there was a desire on part of both the APC and the Council to improve communication so that the advice of the Advisory Planning Commission could be considered earlier, if possible, by Council when it's considering land use matters. So there are a number of recommendations that reflect that agreement that the parties had at that meeting.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm going to recognize as well that the chair of the Advisory Planning Commission, Ms. Leach, is in the audience, so she may be here to answer questions or not. So are there any questions from committee for Mr. Jones? Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you to the Director of Corporate Services, please, with respect to your report. I provided this question to you in advance, so hopefully it won't be a surprise. With specifics, specifically relating to what I call the process flow, relating to recommendations 2 and 3. Process flow, in terms of an application comes in, and then it basically goes to various commissions, and then goes to Committee of the Whole, I presume, and then it goes to Council, and then possibly gets referred to somewhere else, and then eventually gets approved, or possibly going to a public hearing if that's necessary. That's generally what I mean when I talk about the process flow. So I noticed that in the recommendations for recommendation number 2, I am on page number 2 of your report, you talk about how routine and minor applications should go directly to Committee of the Whole and or Council for considerations. Whereas for recommendation number 3, when I contrast that, having to do with the process for rezoning and OCP amendments, it suggests that an application for this would most likely go to, or it's suggested that it goes to Committee of the Whole first before possibly being referred to the APC. So that's great, that's wonderful, but with respect specifically to recommendation number 2, what I didn't understand, and hopefully you can clarify, is the and or Council. Because to me when I read that, it implies that it's possible for a land use change or application to come forward that is possibly of a routine or minor application that could bypass Committee of the Whole and then go straight to Council. And I don't understand what's being said here. Please.
Thank you, through the chair. That actually is absolutely correct. And so the thought being, so there's 2 different things here. Under recommendation 3, rezoning and OCP amendments, that's very clear what those are, right? And so this suggestion is, it doesn't matter what kind or what complexity of those applications come forward, those go through the Committee of the Whole first. The intent of recommendation 2 and the discussion around at the meeting was there's going to be a degree of subjectiveness as to what we would consider a minor or routine application. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about here are development and variance permits. And ultimately, those will all require a formal process that's defined through legislation, which means there will have to be notice provided to residents 10 days in advance of those coming forward. So the intent of this is to provide what I thought was the interest at the meeting of saying, okay, we recognize that there are going to be varying degrees of variances being looked at, some minor, some not so minor. And as I mentioned at the meeting, over time, we will refine what those actually mean. So this would, in fact, allow, as you suggest, an application if staff thought it were very minor to come directly to council. That doesn't mean, though, that the development variance permit process doesn't have to still occur as defined in the legislation, that being notification and opportunities to speak at a council meeting. So there's I'll call it a hierarchy of applications that might come forward. And so some would go to the committee of the whole. And again, this is going to be some subjectiveness. We're going to look at this and say, oh, that should probably go to the committee of the whole. The committee of the whole could change that decision, say, no, you know what, this should go back and be considered by the Advisory Planning Commission. Something could come directly to council, and council could make the same decision. Oh, do you know what, staff? This is something that we think probably should have been considered by the Committee of the Whole and or the Advisory Planning Commission. So the intent of this is to provide a degree that allows council to make decisions on those types of applications and what should go where. Council could choose to do this entirely differently if it so chose. But from a staff perspective, we're thinking this would be a good place to start. And to be honest, you know, we bring something forward to council, and council thought, no, that's something that should go to one of these other bodies, the Committee of the Whole or the APC, then we do that. And I think that's the process that over time will allow us to define what, as an organization, we consider minor, routine, significant, or not. So that's the intent of this.
Follow up, if I may, Chair, again to the Director of Corporate Services. Thank you for that very clear and concise and thorough explanation of the differences between a minor application and a regular application and a very large, I guess, application and its level of effect to land use. I guess as many years ago when I came to British Columbia from another jurisdiction, and then came to my first council meeting, I guess I just assumed from a transparency perspective that all things that have to do with land use changes, and it sounds to me that I'm being educated here, that all things would go through Committee of the Whole with respect to transparency. And what I'm hearing you say, that it would be a choice of staff initially to bypass Committee of the Whole or to bypass the opportunity for the public to pass comment on it and go straight to council, and then allow council to maybe watch out for it and then possibly send it to somewhere else. Because I guess I wasn't aware of this with my ignorance coming from a different jurisdiction, I was surprised over the last little while personally when I saw, for example, the whale watching land use change that seemed to skip Committee of the Whole and go straight to council and be sort of packaged up with the change having to do with, if I remember correctly, the lease change for the marina having to do with bicycle rentals. And there was all the focus on the lease change, and then this other thing I didn't seem to show up until, at least for me, a public hearing. So I'm not saying that that's going to happen in the future, but to me, that whale watching change was not a minor change and really should have gone to Committee of the Whole. And I'm not quite sure still as to why, for example, something like that would happen. And do you imagine in the future something like that could possibly skip Committee of the Whole with respect to what's being set up here in terms of a new policy?
That's actually a really good example because, in fact, that was a rezoning amendment. So under this being proposed, that in fact is suggested that those go to the Committee of the Whole. It's an amendment to the zoning bylaw. So under this process, that would go to committee of the whole before going directly to council.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate you pointing that with respect to a change like that. Could you possibly help me understand, or maybe provide an example from a staff perspective of what a minor application would look like that would skip committee of the whole and go straight to council, please?
So, in my opinion, something like a 6-inch variance to a side yard setback might be something that, as staff, we would look at and say, that might be something that could go directly to council, and we'd bring it to council, and you would make a determination whether we as staff have made the right decision or not. And you know what? We're trying to be efficient and respect time of the Advisory Planning Commission, the public. But at the end of the day, you would say, no, that's more than what we'd consider a minor change, and we would ask you to send that back to either Committee of the Whole or the APC. Or you would say, yeah, no, we agree. We consider that minor, and we're not skipping, just to be clear, the opportunity for public input, because under the legislation, we still have to go through the public input. So what we'd be saying to council at that time is that we would recommend to you that you allow us to go out and inform the community that there's an intent to vary the provisions of the zoning bylaw, and we'd notify residents and provide them the opportunity, like we do today, to come forward to a future meeting to provide their input.
Councillor Braithwaite? Oh,
Supplemental, please. I'm
certainly.
not quite finished yet. Thank you very much, Chair. So then, just to clarify, our final clarification then, if this minor application came straight to council, is that when the 10-day warning or notice would begin, number one? And assuming the notice would go back and then it would come back to a subsequent council, I presume, with the notification having been initiated at that council meeting, I presume. So the people within, if I remember correctly, 30 meters, 100 feet, something like that, get the notification. However, whatever the circle is around the property, would anyone in the public be able to speak at that meeting, or would only those within the notification area be able to speak?
No, anyone would be able to speak if they wanted to come forward. There would be the people that were notified, but no, anyone would be able to speak to the variance.
And I'm sorry, and the notification time would begin when, please?
So the requirement is to provide 10 days notice. So what we do at staff is when the application comes forward, we say, okay, when is the next opportunity to bring this application forward to council? And it depends when the council meetings are. So it might be, might be 2 weeks, depending on the timing. It could be longer. So, but we're always required to give that minimum 10 days notice.
Councillor Braithwaite?
I just wanted to make a point that for Mr. Jones, that another example would have been the application that we just had here, which was a 1-foot variance on a truss that had to go to APC, because they were there the night that we were there. They came in after us, and then they had to wait to come here, and now they have to wait to go to council before the 10 days goes. So that's just another example. So that would have been something that you would have brought straight to council and then had the 10-day notification, and then, is that correct?
Madam Chair, that would have been one that I would have recommended come straight to council. But again, when it came to council, you could have made a decision whether that's an appropriate course of action, or if we need to go back and talk to the Committee of the Whole or the APC.
Thank you. Councillor Croft?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, as you know, I was out of town when the joint meeting was held. So my question is really around number 3. Having sat through the original, whether this was going to be a committee or a commission, and now it became a commission, is that I thought part of the reasoning was is that they didn't want undue influence from council in how applications are being held. So that if a rezoning or official community plan amendment comes to the committee of the whole, we get to discuss it, then it goes to the APC. I'm concerned that that might be seen as an undue influence on the working of that commission.
So at the meeting of the APC, the discussion, or sorry, what staff I guess have experienced is that there have been applications that have first been considered by the APC, and council has found itself not being aware of the applications and the details of those applications, and finding it challenging, in fact, as have staff at sometimes, to respond to questions that you might get in the community. So the idea here is quite simply to make sure that council is made aware of the applications in advance of them being referred to the APC. So a couple of things happen. Council is aware, has some of the details, can communicate with people in the community about what the applications are about. And secondly, to provide applicants, in fairness, an opportunity if there's any early feedback that council might have about their application.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Oh,
yeah,
Councillor
sorry.
Croft?
Yeah, so that leads to the question is then at the committee of the whole, we're just going to be presented with the information with not the opportunity to debate them? Is that the idea?
Thank you. Through the chair, I think you'll be presented with the information, but I also think that there's an expectation, certainly from, and I think there'd be appreciation from a proponent and from the community if you had some initial thoughts about the application. You cannot make a decision one way or the other about it, but if you had some feedback to a proponent, I think that would be appreciated by all. And to be honest, that's a very common approach in local government. So I think you'd find in a lot of communities, items would first come to the council or the committee of the whole, if they had such a thing. And from there, if they in fact had an advisory planning commission, it would be referred from the committee or the council to the advisory planning commission.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Councillor Croft?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just, on the process that Councillor Zelka raised is, then if I'm seeing this correctly, then it would come to the committee of the whole, it would be sent to the advisory planning commission, and then it would come to council. It would not come back to the committee of the whole. Would it have to then come back to the committee of the whole? It seems as though we're adding another layer into the process.
How staff see this happening is coming to council, saying, here's the application, here's what's being proposed. Council would then refer it to the advisory planning commission. Council would have the benefit of having information about what the application actually is about, and then it would come back through the committee of the whole. It would not come back directly to council.
Thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Thanks. I just want to say thank you for bringing this forward. I think that the recommendations that you've laid out will really save time around the table for the APC members. It'll, by taking out the applications that are minor land use applications or and bring them straight to us, that's going to really save a lot of time around that table. So I appreciate that. So when the time is right and when you've finished hearing from the public, I would be happy to move the recommendations in the report.
All right. Do we, I think another further question from Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. One more question relating to recommendation number 1, the APC Procedures Manual. When I read it over, it indicated that, I guess, upon initiation of that process, or as indicated in the manual, that the Advisory Planning Commission would be making available on the website all reports that would from then point go through the APC. I'm doing this from memory because unfortunately the manual is not in front of me and I still can't find it on the website. Is there an intention on staff's part to put all of the Advisory Planning Commission's agenda and reports through the electronic agenda process that we follow here on Council and Committee of the Whole, please?
Ms. Jensen?
Yeah, if I'm, pardon me, if I may, through the agendas that are set out on the District of Oak Bay website, there is one section that's specifically to each of the advisory bodies. So there's one for the Design Panel, one for the Heritage Commission, and one for the Advisory Planning Commission. And in those areas, we do set out the agenda, and then we do attach the reports at the same time as the agenda is released.
Councillor Zelka?
Absolutely, I see that now, and when I go to the reports for the previous meeting relating to the Advisory Planning Commission, where the Advisory Planning Commission manual was presented, I see the other reports, but I don't see the actual manual on the website. So, but I just find it ironic that the report says we're going to publish everything, but that report that said that is not itself being published. And maybe you can find it, but I can't. So possibly after this meeting, you can show me where it is on the website, because I simply cannot find it anywhere.
Well, and if I made a follow-up on the procedures manual, we have not attached that as a report. It's not a report related to a land use application. The procedures manual itself is still in draft form until we complete it.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen.
Thank you. So then this brings up a follow-up question. If a report is mentioned in an agenda item on the APC, and that agenda item makes reference to a report that's not a land use item, will that report also be provided as well, since it talks about how all reports in the APC manual will be provided? Or will only the land use items be shown?
If I may, to date, the bulk of the reports that have gone through the Advisory Planning Commission are land use applications. Those are the reports that have been addressed by the Advisory Planning Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. Okay, if there are any other further comments or questions from committee, I'll move to the public. Councillor Zelka?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, for this opportunity. I wasn't going to ask, but since you've asked, I would definitely will ask a follow-up question. I appreciate that. Is the APC manual in draft form? I know it is in draft form. Is it available as a public document today?
Ms. Jensen?
We could make it available, absolutely.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, if there are no further questions from committee, I'll move to the public. Please come and join us, Mr. Sultanum, and be sure to write your name and introduce yourself for the public.
James Sultanum, 1009 Monterey Avenue. Thank you for the opportunity. I have first a comment and then a question through you, Madam Chair. When I think about the idea of staff deciding what's minor and what's not minor, and and eventually deciding to send something to the Advisory Planning Commission or not, what comes to my mind, and I'm not here, I'm as a resident, I'm not giving any legal advice. It is my understanding that the moment you create a committee, by law, you would need to send everything to Advisory Planning Commission, everything related to land planning and use. And so I suggest that Mr. Warren eventually consult or double check that. There are two layers of public consultation. One is the Committee of the Whole, where the public would be able to speak. Another layer is the APC. APC is the community itself. One does not replace the other. That's the idea. You have community involvement, you have different layers. Another one eventually is public hearings. So yeah, I guess that's my first comment. And the other comment, I really don't understand the rationale for sending rezoning applications to the Committee of the Whole first, because in reality, the Committee of the, I tend to agree with Councillor Croft
And I understand some of the comments that you made, Councillor Braithwaite. The idea of the APC should be able to provide insight to the committee of the whole. So I think it is a little bit of it's reversed. Yeah, I guess these are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Sultanum. Mr. Jones, did you want to respond to the first comment regarding the liability or legal requirement?
I can assure you everything we're doing is entirely legal. In fact, to be honest, there need not be anything from a land use application go to an APC or a committee. Those, in fact, could all go directly to council. And I think one of the things council has done here in this community has made a decision that, in fact, there should be more of a process enabling people in the community to respond and to provide input. So that through the APC, that's the wish of council to get that input. And through the committee of the whole, there's an opportunity for members of the public to come and listen to, and in fact, provide input in advance, to be honest, of a lot of the, in advance of the legislative procedures that councils are required to follow. And, the degree of input and feedback, both from committees and from the public, it varies tremendously from community to community, and sometimes it's dependent on the size of their community or not, but it does vary. And I've had the opportunity to work in a few different places. I think Oak Bay provides a really good opportunity for people to provide input into development applications. That's my opinion.
Okay. May I?
Certainly, Mr. Sultan.
Just to follow up. I tend to disagree. I think there's a lot that needs to be improved in terms of community engagement at so many levels. I was actually expecting, not related to application, to ask a question to the presenter and eventually talk to item number 2 of the agenda, and I wasn't able because we were not asked if we had any input. Having said that, I've been following the APC discussions from the get-go. There is a critical confusion between the difference between a committee and a commission. What Mr. Warren says, I tend to agree, but Jones, sorry, Mr. Warren, Mr. Jones says, refers to committees. Some communities have committees, others have commission. The idea, a commission and committee, they're not just a simple, they're not the same thing. They have legislative requirements. And so I reinforce in my opinion, we have a commission. And so it's different and it should be treated as such. All land planning and use should go to commission. I think it's, in my opinion, it's not wise to, for the sake of saving the APC time, not to send minor applications, variances. I think there's a legislative requirement. I suggest the committee or staff to double check the difference between committee and commission. Thank you.
All right. Did you want a chance to respond to that, Mr. Jones, or should we move along?
No, appreciate the feedback. Thanks.
All right. So are there no further questions or comments from committee or the public? Oh, sorry. Mr. Hobson, please come on up.
Curtis Hobson, Oak Bay. Thanks for this. I appreciate this. And if I make a misstatement at any point during what I'm about to say, please correct me. It's my understanding that there is no public input at the APC. I think that's correct.
That is correct.
That is correct. So the fact that contentious, non-minor, possibly contentious, non-minor issues get sent to the committee of the whole. I think that's a good thing because the public would have a chance to comment on that. As we saw with the Quest, there was a lot of confusion about that. The applicant thought, we made it through the APC, you know, what's the problem? And then, of course, it got to, I'm going to refer to the committee of the whole as a high stakes event, because really it is. It's the make or break point. A lot of money can be spent in an application, a lot of time and effort, a lot of community involvement to oppose an application can be spent, and finally it gets to the committee of the whole, and it is, in my opinion, a high stakes event. So the fact that some major land use or zoning applications might get some public input earlier at a committee of the whole is, I think that's a good thing. But I also have similar concerns as Councillor Croft and James have pointed out, that it might be an undue influence. There's problems with both. Public input at the APC might resolve some of that for larger applications and rezonings. The fact that we end up at a committee of the whole currently, and I've written to all of council about this, I really don't think that's a good practice. It is, you know, the people, I'll just use the Quest as the example because that was the most recent. There was a lot of time, money, effort involved on many sides. That application went on for almost 4 years. And I'm talking to people who involved in that, it was stressful. So the fact that, you know, I refer to it as, you know, building your armies on both sides, which I really don't think is helpful at the community level. But I do have the concerns that James and Councillor Croft have. But I also think this is wise in the sense that if applications can come to the committee of the whole where the public has an opportunity to comment on them, I think they can be refined before a lot of money and time is spent on something that's just not going to fly, right? I think if the Quest had, with the proposal, had come earlier, that I think council's intention regarding their decision would have been made apparent to the applicant, and they could have refined their ask, for lack of a better term. And so I'm hopeful that we can come up with a better process in Oak Bay, one that involves the community early, one that gives the applicant and the developers a chance to just kind of test the waters, a trial balloon, like, okay, so this is what you have. You haven't spent a ton of time and money, and you're at the committee of the whole, and the public's on your side, the public's not on your side, council's leaning this way, council's leaning that way. It cleans things up. And it reduces stress and concern for everyone, I would think. But I also think, you know, again, the concerns Councillor Croft and James have mentioned are problematic. So while I appreciate what's being proposed, I don't think it's ideal. I think it's better than what we have, but I do think it could be fine-tuned. And that's what I would make a suggestion. My last piece is minor. I think needs to be codified in some way, shape, or form. I agree with this gentleman here with design and engineering / building error that's asking for a 1-foot variance. I don't think that needs to go to the APC. And in this case, I think empowering staff to make those decisions, hoping that they have a good working relationship with the council, with the APC, that certain things it's 6 inches, right? Do we need to spend a lot of time on 6 inches? And for instance, a foot, like the poor people, they built their house and then the trusses are a foot too high. It's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Like, are we going to make it a 7-foot ceiling in this room? I don't think that's wise either. Just to finish, I do appreciate your work, but I do think it needs a little bit of fine-tuning to ensure that all those concerned have adequate input, and we avoid a situation like the Quest, because I know dealing with a separate issue and talking to the people that dealt with that, it was really onerous, right? And I don't think it's the intent of the structural processes to put the community through such stress. I don't think that was the intent, but that's what we've ended up with. And so, again, I do appreciate what you've done, but I do think it could be refined.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. Councillor Nate?
Oh, I get a question.
Thank you. Through your chair to Mr. Hobson. Thank you for that. And yeah, I think many of us would agree that that was a onerous experience for the applicants of the Quest. But so if you're talking about minor adjustments here, what specifically might you suggest so as to mitigate that kind of a scenario?
I think staff should be empowered to make those decisions. So Ms. Jensen, I think when an application comes to her and it's minor, as we saw tonight, I think she should be able to make that call, right? I don't see that. You notify the neighbors, you get their input if they have concerns, and I do think Ms. Jensen should be able to make that call, or someone of equal power. That would be my suggestion. Most of the time, from what I've seen in the public record, anywhere from a form letter filled out by an applicant who's tossed it around his neighborhood and asked his neighbors to sign it, supporting their request for a variance, to individualized letters. One thing that I wouldn't consider minor would be any alteration to the tree canopy of any way, shape, or form. The paving issue that we talked about, or was talked about a couple of weeks ago, I wouldn't consider that a minor variance. But like we're talking generally, so 29 feet, 28 feet, 10% would be 2.8 feet, so 5%. I'm not an expert at this, but I do think you have expertise on staff to make those decisions, and I think it would be good for staff to be empowered to make those decisions. So we're not, it's off to the committee, now it's back to the committee of the whole, now it's back to council. It's almost like a one and done, right? The planner has said this is a minor variance and it's not impacting anybody. We've solicited input, no one is complaining. Just get it over with.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, you wanted to make a comment?
I will try. I don't disagree with that. One of the things that we, though, do is work within the Local Government Act and the Community Charter, and it's the council can't delegate to us as staff the ability to vary provisions of certain bylaws. We, in fact, have to bring those forward. Now, that doesn't mean should we be looking at our bylaws and trying to adjust those to be more flexible, but if an application comes forward and it's not consistent with our zoning bylaw, the staff don't have the ability to vary those provisions. Hence, you see a lot of these what we'll call minor, in my personal opinion, variances coming forward to council, and it's simply that we as staff don't have the authority to do that. So, there's a matter of degree as well, right? So, is it 6 inches or 9 inches or 12 inches? So, I think through what we're proposing here is that we would be bringing these things forward, and council, they still have to make the decision, but they would be in a position to give us some feedback, as would the APC, and I'm sure we'll hear it from the community. Yeah, that seems like a minor, or no, that seems like something that you should have sent here, and they will be able to make that decision. However, like I said, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking at our bylaws and seeing if there's ways that we can have more flexibility to respond, not just to applicants, but also to what the community is saying to us about things like canopy and that type of thing. So,
sorry, just thinking off the top of my head, perhaps these minor variances could be collated into a list, much like we have our development application list. That's 600 whatever. Like, so monthly, every second council meeting, the minor variances could all be dealt with quickly and efficiently at the council level because, they go pretty quick.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we and that's why I mentioned looking at our bylaws, if we find that many of the the variances that we are considering of a similar vein, then we should be looking at our bylaws and saying, are our bylaws right? Or are they wrong? Or are applicants trying to do too much? But that's a question that we need to ask ourselves, because if there are a lot of minor variances for similar types of activities, we do need to look at that and say, do we need to change, or do we need to enforce our bylaws differently?
And to codify that, I think Councillor Braithwaite has mentioned a few meetings ago, new builds. There should be no variances asked for a new build, regardless of how minor. It's you're starting from a blank slate. Why do you need a variance? You know what you're building. We've seen an exception here tonight, but that should be an exception. I think Councillor Kirby said this is the second exception in the last couple of weeks. So again, there's a lot of nuance to this, and but I do see the point of this. My key point, if I can just reinforce it one last time, is public input early in the process, so we don't end up, with people out in the hallway. Many who told me they couldn't hear as well. So you might want to crank up the volume somehow on the speakers out there. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. All right, if there are no further comments or questions from there are further comments from the public. All right. Please be sure to introduce yourself.
Esther Patterson again. Mr. Hobson's comments were interesting, and I thank Mr. Jones also for clearing that. I guess through you, Chair, my comments are that my experience has been with many municipalities that they don't create ease to accommodate variances. In fact, you have to go through all of the onerous process to discourage variances and actually get people to comply with the bylaws. I believe Mr. Jones was right on with his comments. If you see the same thing reoccurring frequently, then staff will generally bring it forward as something where perhaps the bylaw should be reconsidered and changed to modernize or change things. But I have actually been in communities where by the third application to allow a variance for trusses, the third application was denied, and there was no other variances for trusses that came forward after that. So sometimes, if it's an important issue, making it more difficult supports staff and council in having people comply with bylaws and making sure they do and avoiding the variances. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Any other further comments or questions from the public? Okay, I'll consider a motion.
I'd like to move the recommendations as per the staff report.
Thank you. Seconder?
Seconded.
Okay, are there any other further comments from the committee? Mayor Jensen?
What this is, it's the kind of the confluence of great work done by the APC with their manual, and a lot of thought going into what they actually do, and our staff's keen eye in terms of trying to cut back on inefficient processes. And I think this is a really good start. When you design a process, you design it keeping in mind the importance of the issue that has to be determined through that process. And obviously, you're not going to, it would be a waste of resources if you use a process that's big, it's long, for something very minor. And the other hand, if you have something coming forward like the hotel did, you want to have a big process. You want to have a robust consultation. And I'm confident that by leaving it to staff, they know they can look at the consequences of a variance or a rezoning, and they can make that determination. But if they're wrong, that we're set up here that council can change that, can send it back. And none of this denies the ability of people to come forward at some point and give their views on a variance, as an example. So I think this strikes a very good balance between, we all have scarce resources and the importance of some issues over others. So I thank staff and Ms. Leach as chair and that committee for bringing this forward in the way they have. Very productive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jensen. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. One more question for staff, please. Relating to recommendation number 2. It suggests in the report that approximately 6 months from now, there'll be a review of the procedure with APC and Council to measure its effectiveness. Just was wondering if you could comment, what is the measure of effectiveness, please?
Your Worship, sorry, Madam Chair, that's going to be something that's, I think, subjective, and having a dialogue with the APC and with Council and asking you the question, have we got it right or not? And have we brought things forward to Council that you would have preferred have gone to the APC, and vice versa? Have we brought things forward to the APC that they thought, you know what, that didn't need to come to us? So that is the only way that I can think upon measuring it. Just to be clear, though, at the end of the day, kind of the legislative requirements around notification and public input will all be the same. So there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm just going to quickly make my comments that I think the work of the Public Engagement Committee that's currently ongoing right now, the Mayor's Task Force, is building in we're building a framework and a toolkit that's going to be developed through consultation with the public over the next couple of months. And I think that will help to inform us or provide tools to staff for other means of public engagement on different kinds of applications, and might provide some opportunities that we haven't seen before in this community to engage and to have better dialogue on issues that are more contentious. But I think this is exciting. I think this is very productive use of both the more effective use of the APC if we are sending less of the minor variances to them and encouraging them to spend more time on the bigger issues. I think there's some very large work that still needs to be done, and with respect to the OCP and changes to our bylaws that I think we heard loud and clear from our joint meeting that the parking bylaw is something that we all agree should be updated, and we do see variances frequently on that come in conflict with the current parking bylaw, which I think is from 1981 and doesn't reflect our modern realities. So those are things I hope that they get to do in future, and I'm really pleased that this report's coming forward and that the manual's been developed, or procedures manual has been developed to improve not only those smaller or those issues, but also the process for larger applications, because I do agree that they do become enormously conflict-ridden, and it's divisive and unpleasant, and it doesn't need to be, and it could be community building rather than what we've experienced sometimes over development in this community. So I really appreciate this work, Mr. Jones and Ms. Jensen, and all the work of the Commission. Thank you, Ms. Leach. And I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Not opposed.
Move adjournment.
One more comment from Mr. Jones.
Sorry, Madam Chair, and I've talked way too much, and I apologize for that. I just want council to know that we had hoped to have a group of grade 5 students from Willows Elementary come to talk to us about the Bowker Creek project, and we ran into a thing called spring break. And so this isn't something we would normally do, but with your indulgence, we'd have them come forward to one of our estimates committee meetings on April 12th when they're back in school to present this information to you. We don't normally have delegations come to those meetings, but the timing of the spring break was such that we just couldn't make it work. So if council's or committee's okay with that, we'd intend to advise them of that.
Thank you. Do you need a motion to support that, Mr. Jones?
Just a nod.
Just a nod? Okay. I think we're all nodding. Okay.
Move adjournment.
Yes, quickly, before anyone does nod off. It embarrasses us. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.